Blackbeard is about to go after one of the ancient weapons, and what we have is a coin flip. Heads, Wano is destroyed, and tails, Fishman Island is destroyed. I picked tails for Fishman Island because all of the mermaids have tails. But no matter which catastrophic event occurs, this will bring Blackbeard to within a cherry pie's distance of finally enacting his ultimate ambition, which is to create the Age of Darkness. So ages are a very interesting concept in One Piece, mostly because they're quite vague and yet also universally known and recognized. But in the entire history of fictional pirates, we've only referenced 4 ages thus far. The oldest one is known as the Age of Heaven. This was Alabaster's ancient history briefly told by Robin, which is so old that we don't even know where it falls into the timeline, but it could have been over 5,000 years. The second age we know of is the Age of Cayenne, which translates as Age of the Sea Circle. This is a period of world history that took place around 400 years ago, and that was the age that contains Noland and Calgara. The third named age is the one we're probably the most familiar with, as it began immediately after Roger's execution. His final words sparked the Daikaizoku Jidai, the Great Pirate Era, which has also been referred to as the Golden Age of Piracy. And the final age is the one that we're currently living in, which has no official name as of yet, but it has been referred to as the New Age. The first instance of such was Doflamingo on Jaya, who was eagerly anticipating the eventual conflict with Whitebeard as a full stop to the Great Age of Piracy. And what the world is currently going through right now is the struggle to define the New Age, like how Roger defined the Great Age of Piracy. To take things back to Doflamingo, his plan was something world domination, with the idea of dictating what the New Age was according to his flamingo-y desires, which we don't know a lot about, but it was described by Doflamingo as an era where only the strongest survived, which is probably at least partially inspired by Kaido's ideas as well, considering that Doflamingo was the Joker in his pirate deck. Kaido had a similar ambition. He wanted to make the New Age in his image, which ideally was to embroil the world planet in the greatest and most destructive war ever seen, where only the strong would remain, and ideally he would be the strongest of all of the strong, much like how he structures the hierarchy of the Beast Pirates. And he may well have achieved this through an alliance with Big Mom, were it not for those meddling kids stopping that raid on Onigashima. But the struggle of age definition also extends to the Marines as well, although we're more familiar with their terminology of justice. Currently, Fleet Admiral Sakazuki is a contender to define this new age as an era of absolute and thorough justice, and unintentionally Luffy is also part of this race. He's not actively striving to define an age in his image, but the series is likely to end with him enacting the dawn of the world, and so the name of this new era may end up being the Age of Dawn or something along those lines. But right now, we are a long way from that, because Blackbeard is a very real and very strong contender to define the new age. And to be fair, I do think he has the strongest claim to the new age at the moment, as he did kill Whitebeard, and he certainly believes this because after acquiring Whitebeard's devil fruit, Blackbeard assaulted the ears of anyone who possessed them with the following: "Tell the world, to all you commanders who love boring peace, to the navy, to the world government, and to all the pirates, the future of the world has just been decided." ZEHAHAHAHA. Yes, as of today, my era begins, and the era of Blackbeard would no doubt be something along the lines of the Age of Darkness. But we're currently 2 years into this new age, and nobody has succeeded in defining it yet, and that's because the status quo has yet to be sufficiently destabilized. So for Blackbeard to bring his ambition to fruition, he needs to do something big, real big, and practically world-ending, and there's only a handful of ways to achieve that. Even with top-tier physical power and the greatest of magical fruit, what Blackbeard needs is at least one ancient weapon to enact the Age of Darkness, and he's currently in quite a lucky position in that regard. In fact, it's very similar to starting a new Pokemon game. Blackbeard has woken up in Pallet Town to head over to Professor Oak's lab, and waiting for him there is a choice of 3 ancient weapons. Now, unfortunately, one of them, Uranus, has already been taken by his rival trainer Emu, and Blackbeard is now only able to choose between 2. Except in this case, Professor Oak is Professor Swamp, because now that Caribou has fanboyed his way to Hachinosu, Blackbeard has 2 options that he previously did not have access to. At this very moment, Caribou is the most pivotal character in the world, because he knows the location of both Pluton and Poseidon. He's been there, and not only that, he knows the true nature of both of them as well. And in order to compete with the raw power of Uranus held by the world government, Blackbeard needs to make a very important world-changing decision right here, because both Pluton and Poseidon are extremely vulnerable and waiting to be seized by whichever handsome pirate manages to find them first. And when it comes down to it, Caribou actually joining the Blackbeard pirates is a pretty useless plot point unless one of two things happen. Thing number the first, Blackbeard attacks Wano to take Pluton, or thing number two, Blackbeard attacks Fishman Island to take Poseidon. Because as much as I love Swamp Nakama, his decade-plus character arc doesn't amount to a whole lot if the information he possesses isn't put to use. So which is the most reasonable decision? To this, I would say that Wano sticks out pretty immediately. There's a couple of good reasons why Blackbeard would choose to target Pluton on Wano. The first is that Wano is very close to Hachinosu, significantly closer to Fishman Island, and even if the borders are still up, it is much easier to access. Going up the waterfall is far less treacherous than trying to ride the deep sea currents. And the Blackbeard pirates also have a crew member who can teleport people over a currently unknown but definitely very large distance. So there may not even be a need to sail up the waterfall at all. And Shanks himself, who we generally agree is quite clever, also thought that Wano was Blackbeard's next most logical target. Shanks expected Blackbeard to be on the Wano shortly after Luffy defeated Kaido. That's almost certainly why the red hair pirates were sailing nearby just in case, ready to intercept Blackbeard and put a halt to his nefarious ideals. But that didn't happen, which is interesting because up until recently, Wano was a compulsory excursion for anyone wanting to become the Pirate King, because it was very common knowledge that Kaido had one of the road poneglyphs. So I do think it's very logical for Shanks to assume that Blackbeard would have taken the opportunity to retrieve that mystery cube after Kaido's defeat. But another reason for Shanks' deduction may be because he assumed, or at least thought there was a possibility, that Blackbeard already knew about Pluton. Either way, Blackbeard being on Wano is a bad combination. However, Blackbeard didn't end up taking this opportunity, which is quite lucky because as it turns out, he did not fall into the red-headed trap. Instead, he took a much simpler path, waiting for Trafalgar Law near Winter Island, and fought a much easier battle to acquire Law's 2 road poneglyph rubbings. Really can't argue with the results of that, but it's likely that Blackbeard did not know about Pluton. Not at the time. But would his plan change now that he does? I'm honestly not sure if it would, because narratively, it would feel a bit meh. We spent 4 very real-world years liberating Wano, and if Blackbeard was to attack, then the first thing to happen after the Straw Hats left the country would be it immediately coming under command of another emperor. It just doesn't feel like the right move. Although I can't deny the vision of Blackbeard using Whitebeard's devil fruit to forcibly break the borders of Wano is a pretty epic mental image. And whilst the samurai are very powersome, I do think that they would fall to the full force of the Blackbeard pirates. Because really, all it took was one marine admiral to threaten the entire country, and Blackbeard, quite handily, has one of those, as well as many other strong beings as well. I do feel like this opportunity has probably passed though. I think that Shanks expecting Blackbeard to show up and then him not doing that tells us that Blackbeard's focus is elsewhere, and that we should be very, very afraid for the fate of Fishman Island. When Shirahoshi was revealed to possess the power of Poseidon, this came with a warning. If the rest of the world caught wind of this secret, everything would be thrown into chaos. Powerful forces would seek out the princess's power, both pirates and government alike, which made it clear that at some point someone is gonna go after Shirahoshi, and all of our pieces currently point to that individual being Blackbeard. Lafitte is currently at the headquarters of Deep Sea Current to meet one of the underworld emperors whose specialty is transportation, and his epithet isn't just some lovely sounding title, it actually refers to something we've already referred to in this video, which are the incredibly dangerous deep sea currents of the One Piece world, which are used by various ne'er-do-wells to operate naughty businesses and transport armies outside of world government control. But the key thing is that the only way you can reach Fishman Island is by going through these deep sea currents, which we have seen the Straw Hats do, and without their frankly absurd abilities, they would have died on multiple occasions just trying to visit Fishman Island. The other ship we've seen dive to Fishman Island was Roger's crew, so it tends to be manageable with a tight crew aboard one vessel, and that's why Fishman Island, despite being right under the world government, having no real military might of their own, have still managed to remain a sovereign kingdom. Because logistically, there is no force capable of transporting an entire invading army through the deep sea currents. Let's say you had 100 ships. Each ship would need to have its own Nami level navigator and Straw Hat level crew to solve all of the problems. So you'd end up losing probably more than 90% of your army before you even got there. However, Deep Sea Current Sumit is potentially the only person on this planet to have found a way to travel through the deep sea currents en masse, which is currently the crux of his business empire. However, as flagged in chapter 1126, Blackbeard currently has a standing army of pirates on Hachinosu just waiting for Blackbeard to give them the order to conquer the planet. And so I believe that Lafitte has the integral role of hypnotizing Umit and or his company to have them use their expertise facilities to transport this army, which probably wouldn't be needed if the target was Wano or another surface island. Blackbeard needs someone who specializes specifically in the deep sea currents. But here's the interesting thing, right? Blackbeard was already planning whatever was going on here before Caribou told him about Poseidon. In fact, the last we saw, Caribou still had yet to even meet Blackbeard. So it may not have been his plan to go to Fishman Island directly. Blackbeard may have had other ideas to use the deep sea currents to attack any number of locations, but with Caribou's information, Fishman Island could very well be the target now. And they do think that Shirahoshi is the best possible ancient weapon to target for Blackbeard and Blackbeard alone, because the issue with going after Pluton is that it's a bit of an unknown quantity of an ancient weapon. I mean, we know it's a ship, but even if you get it, you need someone who knows how to operate it and sail it and navigate it and whatever the crap this future ship needs. In the case of the Straw Hats, that's an incredibly easy task because you have Frankie, who has actually seen the blueprints and understands the inner workings of Pluton. But the Blackbeard pirates don't even have a dedicated shipwright, at least not one that's been identified. If they did, it would have to be one of the members they recruited during Impel Down, because the original Blackbeard pirates all have roles already and none of them is shipman. And this lack of shipwright skill is reflected in the vessels of the Blackbeard pirates, which are pretty cool. I really love the simplistic log raft style, but they don't really scream sophisticated sailing. And not only that, but they also have San Juan Wolf, who is referred to as a colossal battleship himself. So these days, they're not even necessarily relying on constructed vessels at all. So I really don't think they have any business sailing the most technologically sophisticated ship ever built. But Shirahoshi and Poseidon, mate, they are just so easy. Shirahoshi may seem like a bad target at first because she can't even control her own abilities. However, considering that Lafitte is a hypnotist, she seems like the most logical target. You acquire Shirahoshi and you hypnotize her into controlling all of the Sea Kings on your behalf. And they have an extremely easy way of transporting a colossal mermaid as well, either via teleportation from Van Alga or by stuffing her into Caribou's swamp universe. And it would be quite thematically appropriate as well, as Shirahoshi's dream is to live under the sun. But after being taken by Blackbeard, you have that thematic threat of being trapped in the darkness and praying for the sun god to show up to bring light back to your world, which could be Luffy quite literally fulfilling a promise that Joy Boy was unable to do for the ancient mermaid princess. But there's more here, because this could also lead to the prophecy of the destruction of Fishman Island. I've made a whole video on this if you're interested, but Madame Charlie is never wrong. And if she says that it's going to be destroyed by this suspiciously Luffy-looking person, then it's going to be destroyed by a suspiciously Luffy-looking person. And wouldn't you know, the Blackbeard pirates, they just happen to have an ability to create suspiciously looking Luffy person. All we need is Katarina Devon to transform into him. It's implied that Devon needs to touch a target in order to assume their appearance, which we saw when she gave Saint Saturn a lovely pat on his, what would you call it, a spider appendage, before claiming that her mission was complete. He then warped away with Van Alga. But let's cut back to what happened slightly before that, which is the still unanswered question of who gave Luffy all of that food on Airken Island and who moved him away to the location where a squad of Marines were so surprised to find him. Now that Airken Island is over, I really don't think there's any answer to this question that doesn't start with a V and end in an Alga. Van Alga warped the food to Luffy because they needed to create enough chaos to access Saint Saturn. But Van Alga could also have warped Luffy away to where the Marines found him, but before they did that, given Katarina Devon a chance to touch him as well. And if so, what we now have is a situation where Fishman Island doesn't even need to be aggressively invaded. The territory is under Luffy's protection, and if someone looking like Luffy shows up, then their guard will be down. And then, in the snap of a Spandam spine, Blackbeard will have acquired one of the 3 ancient weapons and would be in prime position to enact the incoming Age of Darkness. I've fought countless battles and received countless scars, but the only one that aches right now is this one. A man like that will never be satisfied, and no one will be able to stop this era from spiraling into chaos. Shanks and Blackbeard, 2 of this generation's undisputedly most powerful pirates, but more importantly, 2 figures currently battling each other for the very fate of the world. Completely unnoticed by the world itself, mind you, which is much too busy focusing on the more obvious threats, the alliance of Kaido and Big Mom, the rise of the Revolutionary Army, and even the induction of the worst generation. But behind all of that lies a threat that puts all of them to shame, an incoming catastrophe of global proportions that only one lone figure could predict, a catastrophe that he has experienced firsthand in the past, an event untold to us but happened nonetheless. This is the story of Shanks versus Blackbeard. And this story commences, as is customary, at the beginning, the very first chapter of One Piece really, where we are introduced to a seemingly innocuous, jovial young man. This is where we first meet Shanks in a small bar in East Blue. A seemingly classical pirate, he enjoys eating, he enjoys drinking, and most of all, he enjoys general shenaniganry. In this chapter, Shanks serves as a mentor figure to a young Monkey D. Luffy who we see sitting beside him. And at this stage, none of us could have predicted just how important Shanks' life mission was. And I go to the trouble to point this out because skipping forward to chapter 223, we find ourselves in the Grand Line on a tiny island named Jaya. And here we are introduced to a seemingly innocuous, jovial, not young but also not old man. This is where we first meet Blackbeard, also in a bar and also alongside Luffy. And at this stage, none of us could have predicted just how terrifying Blackbeard's life mission was. Have you ever stopped and thought about that? These two characters have more or less the exact same introduction. Two very almost boringly normal humans just chilling in a bar with Luffy before promptly being revealed as being far more than they portrayed themselves as. However, this bar-based introduction is but one of the many extraordinary parallels between Shanks and Blackbeard that tends to go completely unnoticed, which is an all too familiar theme in this conflict. To fully understand this dichotomy, we must step further back though. Notably, both Shanks and Blackbeard have been pirates ever since they were young children. In fact, it's been heavily hinted that Shanks was raised aboard a pirate ship and may not know any other way of life. To Shanks, the feeling of the bare boards of a ship bobbing up and down with the waves may very well be more natural than the sturdiness of solid ground. With Blackbeard, his exact origins are a bit more mysterious, but our earliest known sighting of him was not as a pirate, nor did it involve the seemingly happy-go-lucky childhood of Shanks. Instead, the earliest known image we have of Blackbeard is this one of him tucked in a ball and crying under a crescent moon, which should already ring some alarm bells to the more keen-eyed fans who may have noticed the importance of moon imagery within the series. We see the moon very seldomly, but it's almost like a character of its own, making its presence known in important and meaningful moments. However, at the age of 12, Blackbeard, then known as Marshal D. Teach, would eventually plead to join a pirate vessel. The ship of Edward Newgate, to be precise, a man better known as Whitebeard, and who would eventually go on to become known as the strongest man in the world. And Whitebeard took on Teach as a fully fledged son, along with everyone else who became a member of the Whitebeard Pirates. That was the dynamic of this crew. They were a family, and Teach was happy to play that role for quite some time, whilst his deeper darkness was brewing. In terms of Shanks, he spent his childhood years aboard the ship of Goldie Roger, a fierce rival of Whitebeard, and a man who would go on to become known as the Pirate King. And whilst Roger was less of a fatherly figure, he would take Shanks under his wing, forming a close bond, and even giving Shanks his then trademark straw hat. After which point, I suppose Roger switched to the more grandiose pirate headwear. Another pretty amazing parallel though, isn't it? The fact that Shanks and Blackbeard were once members of arguably the two greatest rival pirate crews in history. Another narrative factor that really does place them on opposite ends of the spectrum of fate. But on their respective journeys, they both had the privilege of exploring the spectacle and wonder that is the Grand Line. And the first wonder they each encountered was the ability to subscribe to the Grand Line Review, which resulted in consistent injections of One Piece culture administered straight into their YouTube feeds. A very handy device, and one that you should really equip yourselves with as well. Please do say hi in the comments below if you are a new member of the Grand Fleet. Welcome. But the Grand Line is the most dangerous stretch of water on this planet, famous for its gigantic monsters both on land and at sea, its apocalyptic weather conditions, and for those who were able to combat both of those, a never-ending supply of powerful opponents, each vying for supremacy of the territory. It was a pirate's paradise that neither Shanks nor Teach had any business being involved in. Both of these children were in way over their heads, but under the umbrella of Roger and Whitebeard respectively, they both experienced the journey of a lifetime, forming plenty of bonds along the way as well. Shanks very notably was not the only child aboard his vessel, so he had something of a brother in a young boy born for the purpose of comic relief named Buggy. Aboard the Whitebeard Pirates, Teach formed similar yet distinctly hollow bonds. In fact, some of the highest praise anyone can really give Teach is for his sheer acting prowess. He was genuinely able to convince his compatriots that he was just another adventure-seeking pirate who enjoyed the occasional cherry pie. But when you're in quite literally the most dangerous place in the world, life is certainly not all that easy, with Shanks and Blackbeard facing an untold number of challenges throughout their days. Shanks, for example, was present and participating in the Battle of Ed War, where Golden Lion Shiki summoned a fleet of 50 ships simply to bring Roger down. Unsuccessfully, by the way. But by far the greatest test was still to come, as one day on a small, unnamed island, the Roger Pirates would come into direct conflict with the Whitebeard Pirates. And it would be here that Shanks and Teach first bore witness to the sheer power of this legendary age, as both captains and crews fought for 3 days and nights before ultimately landing at a stalemate. which is the story as it goes to most people. However, there was another much darker narrative brewing underneath this conflict, because this is where Shanks and Teach would meet for the very first time. And rather interestingly, it wasn't Shanks who first noticed something sinister about this young Blackbeard. Instead, it would be Buggy. After the battle, Buggy had heard a rumor that Teach had not slept for the entirety of the 3 days and nights, and that allegedly Teach had never slept in his entire life. And whilst Buggy did view this as quite a worrying enigma, Shanks' initial response was far more innocent, stating that Teach's life must have been twice as fun as a result of that. But Buggy insisted that Teach was in fact some sort of monster, which would spark the beginning of Shanks' interest in Teach, because despite the fact that now both members of the Whitebeard and Roger Pirates were aware of some of Teach's more, how shall we say, strange tendencies, they all very much overlooked it. A mistake that would eventually come back to haunt them, as well as threaten the stability of the planet as we know it. But Shanks would keep a close eye on Teach wherever possible, going on to discover a highly malevolent nature within him. But what's worse is that Teach also had the power behind him to back this up. As a member of the Whitebeard Pirates, he was no doubt strong, but Teach kept his true strength completely shrouded. Although Shanks would receive a taste of this power on one occasion, where Teach managed to outmatch him and delivered Shanks' now trademark triple/scar. After this point, Shanks immediately understood the true threat that was rising within Teach, and what's worse is that there would likely be no one capable of stopping him. It was around this time that a world-changing event took place. Shanks' captain and mentor, Goldie Roger, having become the Pirate King and with very little time left to live, decided to turn himself into the Marines, with Roger's execution being publicly scheduled to be held in his birthplace of Logtown. And whilst the world would generally hold this day up as a celebration of ridding themselves of one of the greatest criminals to have ever existed, this would be Shanks' darkest hour. His captain had been killed, his crew disbanded, and even Buggy refused to join Shanks on his journey. For the first time in his life, Shanks was truly alone, left with nothing but the knowledge of the incoming storm of Teach, which would begin rumbling in the not too distant future, as the day would swiftly arrive where Teach betrayed the Whitebeard Pirates. After having sailed with this crew for well over 2 decades, Teach, without hesitation, decided to murder a fellow crew member in order to acquire a devil fruit that they had found. This was known as the Yami Yami no Mi, a Logia type fruit that allows its user to conjure, manipulate, and become darkness. This was the item that Teach had been seeking throughout his entire time with Whitebeard's crew, and what he had been waiting 2 decades in the shadows to attain. And after having consumed it, he promptly fled and took on the new name of Blackbeard. Whitebeard at this point was elderly, and his health was rapidly failing. But another of his crew, Portgas Diaz, set out to pursue Blackbeard to punish him for the unthinkable crime of killing a son of Whitebeard, an endeavor that would also sadly fail, leading to the defeat of Ace at the hands of Blackbeard. And furthermore, after handing Ace over to the Marines, it would provoke an entire war between the world government and the Whitebeard Pirates, all of which was very much according to Blackbeard's plans. But stepping back in time a bit, with no one else left to carry on his captain's legacy, immediately after Roger's execution, Shanks set about to form his own crew, and in the Sea of East Blue he would find a fair few key allies, one of which being Yasopp, better known as the father of Usopp, and Ben Beckman, who would become the first mate of the crew, which would go on to be dubbed as the Red Hair Pirates. And several more key members would be recruited, such as Lucky Roo, before they landed in the iconic Fuchsia village in East Blue. Here, as we know, Shanks met a young Monkey D. Luffy, and seeing the determination of Roger within the boy, Shanks would not only sacrifice one of his arms to save Luffy, but also leave him with Roger's straw hat, making Luffy promise to return it to him when he became a great pirate. Now, having sensed a small ray of hope for the future, the stark reality of now would continue to dawn on Shanks, and so his crew left Fuchsia village to continue their mission, which would eventually bear fruit as 6 years later, Shanks would officially become recognized as an Emperor of the Sea. 4 years following that is when the incident aboard Whitebeard's ship would occur, and after conducting the brutal murder, Blackbeard quickly set about to gather his own crew, which he did rather successfully. A band of like-minded, terrifyingly powerful, and sickeningly brutal beings who would form the core of the Blackbeard Pirates. But having achieved the power and status of an emperor, Shanks would waste no opportunity to put his agenda of stopping Blackbeard into action. And in this effort, he even made a point to visit Roger's old rival Whitebeard, who in this day and age was also recognized as an Emperor of the Sea. However, although they shared equal status, Whitebeard very much saw Shanks as the young apprentice pirate that he once knew. It would be here that Shanks issued Whitebeard with a dire warning regarding Blackbeard, and one that would ultimately be ignored, as Blackbeard generally seems to have a bit of a talent of doing. But whether it was sheer arrogance, foolishness, or simple skepticism, it became clear to Shanks that Whitebeard, the strongest man in the world, would not be in a position to prevent the encroaching darkness of Blackbeard. And to this end, Shanks even stated that if Whitebeard did not listen, then no one would be able to stop this era from spiraling into chaos. A statement that would go on to prove true not too long afterwards, as the Whitebeard Pirates declared war on the world government in order to rescue Ace. This would be a conflict that quite literally shook the world, the outcome of which could very well well have seen the end of established global society should Whitebeard prevail. But as stated previously, this was all according to Blackbeard's plans. Behind the curtain, this enormous war was simply a mechanism designed to weaken and kill Whitebeard so that Blackbeard could acquire his devil fruit, the Guruguru no Mi, widely known as the most destructive Paramecia type fruit in existence. And this plan worked shockingly well, with Blackbeard and his crew arriving on the battlefield at the last second to take Whitebeard's life and then take his ability, thus making Blackbeard the first person in this entire series capable of wielding two devil fruit powers simultaneously. And also, for the very first time in his life, the world was forced to pay attention to the suddening colossal threat that was Blackbeard. And while Shanks did move to prevent the war before it began, he was intercepted by another emperor and arrived only after the deaths of both Whitebeard and Ace. But his presence put an unequivocal full stop to the war, as neither the battle-weary Marines nor the unprepared Blackbeard were game enough to face the full force of the Red Hair Pirates. In fact, in Blackbeard's own words, "I'll pass. I got what I wanted. This is not yet the time for me to fight you." Showing us all for the first time that not only had Shanks been monitoring Blackbeard, but Blackbeard had also kept a very keen eye on Shanks, and had even factored him into whatever his grand plan would end up being, an event which still has yet to play out. But following the war, Blackbeard would expeditiously rise in notoriety, defeating the remnants of the Whitebeard pirates and acquiring their territory to secure his position as a new Emperor of the Sea. And that really did put an end to the era of legends, with both the Roger pirates and the Whitebeard pirates effectively eradicated. However, what remained in their place were now the students of these two legends. One who had taken on board everything that Roger was and who was determined to continue his captain's legacy. The other who had spit on everything that Whitebeard was and who had actively done everything he could to destroy his captain's legacy. There is no doubt that these two will come into conflict once more, as one of the most powerful yet subtle meta-narratives of One Piece is continuously unearthed. Shanks versus Blackbeard, the greatest story never told.
2 years ago, the Straw Hats were separated by Bartholomew Bearman on Sabadi Archipelago, and we proceeded to skip 2 years forward in time to their eventual reunion. However, the world didn't stop moving while the Straw Hats were absent, and during this time, several incidences of historic proportions occurred, mostly instigated by members of the worst generation, and the most intriguing of all was the Rocky Port incident, which saw a most unlikely alliance form between Trafalgar Law Koby, no last name, and Marshall D. Teach in order to bring down one of the most legendary pirates to have ever walked the earth of this planet that is notably not called Earth. This is the story of the Rocky Port incident, which I will say is one of the most deceptively named incidences in One Piece, because despite being named the Rocky Port incident, this event actually takes place on the notorious pirate island Hachinosu, located deep in the New World. And as a brief history, this location is known as Pirate Paradise, and it holds a very pivotal pirate past, as this was the birthplace of the Rocks Pirates, the most powerful pirate crew to have ever existed, which once threatened to completely overthrow the world government, and Hachinosu is also where the Davy Back fight was developed. And as a result, it's often speculated that Rox D. Zebek was able to construct his crew via winning people from Davy Back fights, but this is without exaggeration one of the most important locations in One Piece history, as there have been at least 3 historical incidences tied directly to Hachinosu, with each of them going on to profoundly shift the direction of the world. One of which was the world government raid on the island to steal the treasure of the Rocks Pirates 38 years ago, which ended up becoming the catalyst of the God Valley incident, which we've covered in another video. And after the God Valley incident, the Rocks Pirates immediately dissolved, which left governorship of Hachinosu essentially up for grabs. And for a very long time, it was assumed that the island fell under control of Whitebeard, the next most powerful member of the Rocks Pirates. However, later on, it was revealed that it was actually Ochoku who successfully fought and won the right to rule the island. And as a quick side note, in the official translation, Ochoku is known as Wang Zi, and that's because Ochoku is the Japanese name for the real-life Chinese pirate lord Wang Zi. But I personally still call him Ochoku because Oda uses the Japanese name, not the Chinese name. But whatever his name is, Wang Chokuzi was an absolute beast and managed to keep control of Hachinosu throughout the era of the 4 emperors despite not being an emperor himself, which is a very big and difficult deal. Because post-God Valley, in order to just survive in the New World, you generally needed to align yourself with one of the 4 emperors. But I should also say it's entirely possible possible that Ochoku was the only former Rocks Pirates member who actually wanted the island. Whitebeard, Kaido, and Big Mom do not remember their time there fondly, and likely didn't even contest it. And many of the other Rocks Pirates members that we know of also had ambitions beyond ruling this one island. But even if he ended up with it by default, I need to emphasize again that Ochoku's strength is the tippy top of world class and should not be underestimated. And that strength was the main challenge that needed to be overcome during the Rocky Port incident. Because as a pirate, Ochoku specializes in breaking the law, something that potential victim Trafalgar Law was very aware of whilst planning his individual mission to infiltrate Hachinosu in order to read a poneglyph that was kept on the island. Because the law is of course Trafalgar D water law, and in addition to taking revenge on a flamingo, he's trying to unravel the mystery of the Will of D. In regards to the poneglyph itself, we don't know its contents at the time of this recording. However, it's extremely unlikely that this was a road poneglyph, as 3 of them are already accounted for on Wano, Whole Cake Island, and Zo. And if Law had found the final road poneglyph on Hachinosu, then his next move after Wano surely would have been to set sail to Whole Cake Island to achieve his missing one, find Love Tale, and become the Pirate King. Hooray. But that didn't happen. There was no hooray. And Law's original plan to infiltrate Hachinosu didn't happen either. Because here's how this plan was supposed to go. Law commandeers a smuggling vessel that does business with Hachinosu, sneaks onto the island with no one noticing him, finds a mystery cube, absconds with a rubbing of said cube, then goes to the Winchester to have a nice cold pint and wait for all of this to blow over. That's how it was supposed to go, but now here's how the plan actually did go. Oh no, I, Trafalgar Law, have just ruined everything and set off a chain of events that will cause a world-changing incident. My bad, everyone. And it really was his bad, because things went wrong right from step one. As instead of a smuggling vessel, Law accidentally hijacked a passenger ship called the Rocky Port. Why is a ship called a port, you ask? Well, don't ask questions, because I don't like answering them. The point is that this wasn't a standard passenger ship, as it actually contained the king and nobles of an unidentified country affiliated with the world government. So instead of the original plan, which was to stealthily sneak himself onto Hachinosu, from the perspective of the world government, what Trafalgar Law did was kidnap a king and brazenly set sail to the island. An alarm was immediately raised, the Marines were contacted, and Captain Koby was dispatched to recover the king as well as his assorted nobles. Now, Koby seems like a rather low-ranking Marine to take on a mission like this, because the brief is essentially that a ship containing a king has been abducted by a member of the worst generation. And you may think that back during this time, oh, what's the big deal? Trafalgar Law and the other supernova were still considered rookie pirates. However, this is not true, because prior to the Rocky Port incident, Law's bounty was raised to 440 million berries. So we were dealing with a very serious threat here, and Koby, of all people, was sent to deal with him. Now, this is likely due to a combination of Koby just happening to be in the area at the time, but also the cripplingly inelastic nature of the Marines as an organization following Sakazuki's promotion to Fleet Admiral. Because something the Fleet Admiral Sakazuki has complained about at great length after the time skip are the lack of resources and manpower available to him, which I should say is mostly due to his occupation of the New World. It's because of his aggressive nature that the Marines are always stretched so thin, all of which in this case has resulted in Koby being put in charge of a mission that would rapidly spiral out of control and see him at the epicenter of a world-changing incident. So the stage is set, however, we have one more rotund actor to introduce, and that would be the opportunist Marshall D. Teach, aka Blackbeard, who may not be the Pirate King yet, but he certainly is the absolute king of being in the right place at the right time. If Blackbeard senses a big event happening, then he'll invite himself to the party, and he won't leave when you politely ask him to either. That's the worst part. Because Blackbeard's ambition in this conflict wasn't just to visit Hachinosu, it wasn't to do stuff on the island, it was to take the island itself, which plays a big part in his master plan of something world domination. And prior to this point, Blackbeard had clearly felt that a fight against Ochoku and his forces was not one that he could win, which actually brings up the question of whether or not the Rocky Port incident took place before or after the Payback War, the latter event being the conflict between the Blackbeard pirates and the remnants of the Whitebeard pirates led by Mako the Phoenix, and what resulted in Blackbeard being labeled as an Emperor of the Sea. My inclination would be to say that the Rocky Port incident happened before the Payback War, because I do feel like at any time after Blackbeard became an emperor, his legion would have probably been powerful enough to just take the island themselves. Back to said islands though, given that Blackbeard is heavily hinted to have inherited the will of Roxy-Zebek, he may see Hachinosu as his rightful territory as it was once possessed by Rox himself. Even then, Hachinosu is but a slice in Blackbeard's larger cherry pie of ambition, which we will shortly come to see as Trafalgar Law, Koby with the Marines, and the Blackbeard pirates each converged onto Hachinosu, starting a chaotic free-for-all battle. However, it wouldn't remain that way for very long, and that is because of the aforementioned beast Ochoku. It was immediately clear to all invading parties that individually they were no match for him, as well as the thousands of pirates stationed on the island. So Hachinosu in Japanese literally means beehive, which is why you'll sometimes hear it referred to as Beehive Island, with the idea being that this island is ever so full of pirates that they just keep swarming out relentlessly and unendingly like bees from a hive. And so for the sake of survival, Law, Koby, and Blackbeard formed one of the most unlikely alliances in One Piece history to take on the residents of the island together. And this alliance was extremely successful for each faction. And it has been implied that what happened here was sort of like a God Valley Light, with Koby and Blackbeard teaming up to defeat Ochoku, as in chapter 1059, Blackbeard directly credits Koby as being the reason why he was able to overcome Ochoku. However, a lot of this was also thanks to the efforts of Law, who cut through the swarm of pirates like delicious melty butter, and even collected 100 pirate hearts as a souvenir from his vacation to the island. And so this incident saw the fall of one king and the rise of 3 kings in his place. That was 2. This is 3. At this stage, we don't know if Law found the poneglyph that he was looking for. However, his role in the Rocky Port incident was enough to obtain a position as one of the 7 warlords of the sea, which Law received after he presented the hearts of the 100 pirates he took. Trafalgar Law was also labeled as the mastermind of the Rocky Port incident, essentially due to his very Zoro-like mistake of getting on the wrong ship, being misidentified as an act of sheer genius that directly led to the collapse of Ochoku's empire. Meanwhile, Koby became known as the hero of the Rocky Port incident, as he was able to successfully protect the people that Law accidentally kidnapped. Although we don't know exactly how Koby eventually got everyone off Hachinosu, because the Rocky Port ship itself sustained heavy damage and remains on Hachinosu to this very day. Apparently it's being repaired and being prepared for use by its new owners. But Koby's eventual title did lead him to being awarded a 5-star bounty from Cross Guild, meaning that he is worth 500 million berries to them. And after defeating Ochoku, Blackbeard of course installed himself as the ruler of Pirate Island, and likely used his newfound legion of previous Ochoku underlings to engage in the Payback War, all of which culminated in him becoming one of the 4 emperors of the sea. And if this is the case, then you can argue that both Koby and Law played a direct role in making Blackbeard an emperor of the sea by assisting him during the Rocky Port incident. And should things have gone differently, should Law or Koby have made different decisions that day, then we may not be dealing with the great overwhelming darkness of now. But the Rocky Port incident also had a series of knock-on events, as Koby and Blackbeard would confront each other once more on Amazon Lily, and during that time Blackbeard decided to kidnap Koby due to his notoriety gained from Rocky Port. The idea behind this was to hold Koby as ransom in exchange for Hachinosu being officially recognized as a world government nation, which would then make Blackbeard an official king. And to be completely honest here, neither Koby nor I saw how this would work, or even why Blackbeard would want to do this in the first place. He's already an emperor of the sea, which grants him more power and status than an individual king affiliated with the world government, but Blackbeard, he seems to have his heart set on this idea. So maybe he's planning on usurping the empty throne through a combination of legit politics and your more traditional scallywaggery. However, capturing Koby would prompt Vice Admiral Monkey D. Garp and Sword to launch an attack on Hachinosu, very much creating a Rocky Port sequel, but one that did not end anywhere near as kindly for the Marines, as it did result in Koby being liberated, but Garp was defeated and captured in the process. Essentially, they traded one hero for another, and therefore it could still be Blackbeard's plan to use Garp as his bargaining chip to turn Hachinosu into a world government affiliated nation. But something else we should talk about is an idea that I refer to as the Rocky Port retcon, because this incident has up until recently been referred to in very vague ways by author Eiichiro Oda, who I'm convinced did not have a very clear idea of what this incident was when he first named it in the story. And we can start with that actually, the name. In world, the reason why it's called the Rocky Port incident is likely to highlight the world government side of the story. It very easily could have been called, and perhaps more accurately should have been called, the Hachinosu incident. But from a meta perspective, my personal idea as to what happened here is that Oda wasn't originally planning for this incident to take place on Hachinosu, but rather it was supposed to be an actual location called Rocky Port, not a ship, which is something that he may still have intended up until very recently. As in chapter 1080, Avala Pizarro mentions that they've just finished repairing Rocky Port during the invasion invasion of Sword, but the way Kizaru refers to it makes it sound like an actual port on the island rather than a ship. But the argument here is that over time the lore has evolved in Oda's mind and he has mentally retconned the incident. It is my belief that Rocky Port was originally a vaguely defined location, but had to be changed to the name of a ship once Oda had a better idea of what he wanted it to be, which eventually included both Koby and Blackbeard in this event of ever-escalating proportions, because it also conflicts quite a bit with Lore's motivation at the time as well. The Rocky Port incident was originally portrayed to us as something that Trafalgar Law did on purpose in order to become a warlord of the sea and use that permission to take revenge on Doflamingo. However, with the way that both Law and Rocky Port have evolved, Law's motivation was changed to seeking out the poneglyph on Hachinosu, which doesn't make a huge amount of sense because it was only after Dressrosa that Law resolved to figure out the mystery of the Will of D. Prior to this, Law was almost completely consumed by anger, and there was nothing on his mind except bringing down Doflamingo, which he was both willing and expecting to throw his life away to do. Trafalgar Law himself has changed a lot during the course of One Piece, as Oda had originally intended him to be more of an antagonistic character, if not an outright antagonist, which is something that was still the general idea all the way up to Punk Hazard before the more protagonistic shift was made. Meaning that when the Rocky Port incident was originally conceptualized, it was likely that Law was still this fiendish mastermind to some degree, doing horrible things for the sake of achieving another horrible thing it is he wanted to do. But as Law evolved and became a much more clear-cut good guy, the original reasoning for the Rocky Port incident wouldn't quite hold anymore. And so he needed a slightly more noble reason to cause this incident. So what Oda did is he gave pre-Dressrosa Law his post-Dressrosa motivation, which I guess it's fine if you don't think too much about it, but all of the above may also be reasons why Oda isn't so keen on drawing the Rocky Port incident in the manga, because it does involve a lot of elements that don't necessarily fit cleanly together. And so the whole legend of this event may be better served by keeping it as vague as possible, to keep the overall picture a bit out of focus so that the imperfections aren't quite as visible. Or if you do need to explain them, then look, let's just say that these inconsistencies are a result of details being lost and changed in retellings of stories over time.
Hello and welcome to the Grand Line Review, your source for everything One Piece, and today I thought it would be fun to discuss everything we know about one of the most understated events to have ever happened in One Piece, being the Payback War. What exactly is the Payback War? Well, this was a world-changing event that occurred during the 2-year time skip, smack bang in the middle of it actually, about a year prior to our current timeline. It was an event that saw a gigantic scale clash between the remnants of the Whitebeard pirates who had lost their captain during the Paramount War a year prior, and the rising forces of the Blackbeard pirate, which is interesting because in many ways the Payback War is representative of a generational shift in the world, and this very much wiped away the final shred of power that the Whitebeard pirates held over the Grand Line and specifically within the New World. But first up, let's talk about the etymology behind the Payback War. This is not the official name for this conflict, and in English it is known as the Grudge War in both the Viz manga and Funimation subs. And as far as I can tell, the name Payback War is a relic from the world of scanlations that has rigorously stuck within the One Piece community, to the point where the One Piece wiki article is even titled Payback War, despite mentioning that it does have an official name. Now, as for which is more correct, well, if we look at the Japanese, it is referred to as the Otoshimai Senso. Otoshimai having two meanings, one of which is a settlement for dispute, usually caused by some sort of blunder, which would generally be financial debt, and the other, much more applicable meaning here, would be to get even with someone, and Senso simply means war. So if we were going literal, Payback War honestly sounds a bit more accurate because it implies an active quest for revenge. Whereas a grudge is a very passive thing, you hold a grudge, you don't necessarily act on it. However, with how these events actually played out, you may find that by the end, grudge is in fact the more correct word to have used, and we'll go over that. With that said, I'm still going to refer to it as the Payback War because, scan or not, it is the most commonly recognizable name. Now, as for what led up to this event, we do need to briefly examine the childhood of one Edward Newgate. He was born on an island called Sphinx and grew up as an orphan under exceptionally rough conditions. Then, after becoming a pirate and taking on the infamous Whitebeard name, Newgate would funnel his money back to Sphinx in order to make sure that his home prospered and that nobody would have to grow up under the same conditions as he did. And this is very, very important to mention because this one small yet delightful little island would go on to be a major catalyst for the Payback War. Before that though, during his long reign on the seas, Whitebeard recruited a young boy named Marshall D. Teach, a seemingly innocuous young lad who would grow up with the Whitebeard pirates, spending more than 2 decades sailing with them. However, Teach had rather dark ambitions and a particular skill for playing the long game, and as it turns out, one of Teach's primary motivations for joining this crew was to discover a certain devil fruit, which we now know as the
the Yami Yami no Mi. And while it did take about 26 years to do so, eventually the crew did stumble upon this fruit, at which point Teach murdered his alleged comrade Thatch and fled the Whitebeard pirates, causing an unforgivable rift between Teach and the crew. One that would only go on to get much worse. As it turns out, one of Whitebeard's division commanders, Port Gasti Ace, made it his own personal mission to hunt Teach down, who had now adopted the name of Blackbeard. However, Ace's mission did not end well, and the two clashed on Banaro Island, resulting in Ace's defeat and subsequent turning over to the War government, who then scheduled his execution. And this decision would spark the much more well-known Paramount War, whereby the full forces of the Whitebeard pirates marched on Marineford to save Ace, and which, as we all know, also did not work out well. And Blackbeard took full advantage of this event to deliver the final blow and kill Whitebeard, as well as steal his devil fruit ability, being the Gura Gura no Mi. All of which is pretty insane when you lay it all out like that, because then you come to realize that this one man was single-handedly responsible for toppling the entirety of the Whitebeard pirates, simply through incredible planning and situational awareness. Now from here things get a bit hazy, because this would be where the time skip occurred in the series, and there is a generally accepted thought that the remnants of the Whitebeard pirates, led by 1st Division Commander Marco, were burning with the desire for revenge and mustered everything they could to launch a retaliatory attack on Blackbeard and his ever-growing legion of piracy. But this is not actually the case. In reality, Blackbeard was the instigator of the Payback War, as his next mission after defeating Whitebeard was to capture his former territories and consolidate power within the New World. Meanwhile, the Whitebeard pirates had a very simple mission, which was explained by Marco in chapter 909. After the Paramount War, we at least wanted to protect the village that Pops had cared so much for. When Blackbeard invaded, we started the Grudge War against him. And here Marco is of course referring to the island of Sphinx, which we briefly went over. But following the death of their captain and 2 division commanders, being Thatch and Ace, the Whitebeard pirates had no intention of engaging the Blackbeard pirates for the mere concept of revenge. Their focus was entirely dedicated to protecting Whitebeard's remaining legacy. However, after the Blackbeard pirates launched an invasion, Marco and the remnants were forced to respond, thus beginning the Payback War. What's kind of frustratingly vague about this though is that we're currently unsure what this invasion of Blackbeard refers to. In context, it sounds an awful lot like he attempted to invade Sphinx, but that's because Marco was talking about that immediately before bringing up the invasion. Because at the same time, it seems very unlikely that Sphinx would be the target, because it does remain well and prosperous to this day, which I'm not so sure that Blackbeard would have allowed, considering, and spoiler alert, he won the war. So I believe that this invasion is referring to another territory, or indeed territories, held by the Whitebeard pirates, at which point they were left with 2 options. Either surrender and give everything up to Blackbeard, or fight and start a war. So of course, they did the latter. And this was by no means a small-scale conflict. This was by all accounts a clash on a scale of the Paramount War. In fact, according to Nico Robin in chapter 820, it was quite a large battle, with each side bringing in plenty of help. In the end, Marco's group was obliterated. It was only after this major confrontation that Blackbeard was first included among the list of the 4 emperors. And we'll get back to that second part in a bit, but this statement quite clearly references the allied pirate crews, of which the Whitebeard pirates were associated with a further 43 crews in addition to their main forces, comprising of 1,617 men. That number is a pre-Paramount War figure as well, and at the very least there would be 2 members down, I guess, following it, but the allied crews did not fare best in that conflict either. And while it is currently unknown how many of the allied crews showed up for the Payback War, their loyalty to Whitebeard was so profound that I imagine everyone who was physically able to would have engaged. But even if we were strictly talking about the Whitebeard pirates alone, Blackbeard still would have needed a massive force of his own to take them all on. And he built a similar structure to the Whitebeard pirates, actually mimicking their division commander system with his own implementation of the 10 Titanic captains, as well as gathering quite a range of allied crews. An example of one of those crews would be the Peachbeard pirates, although it would be an admittedly bad example, because Peachbeard is confirmed to have joined that legion following the Payback War, not before or during. Regardless, Blackbeard mustered the forces to take on the Whitebeard pirates and their allies, which would have been quite the massive conflict, and not at all how the scarce portrayals of the Payback War have been shown in either the anime or the manga. When it comes to the manga, we actually have no visual depiction of the battle save for this small panel showing Blackbeard and Marco, rather dramatically shaded and everything. Whereas the anime took a fair few more liberties, how shall we say, with how they decided to handle this scene. And here I'm particularly referring to episode 890, which I suppose is kind of like the Payback War if it was depicted as an interpretive dance. Which is weird but also kind of interesting. The problem the anime had here is that the true details of the battle had not yet been revealed, so they had the rather difficult job of showing a battle without actually being able to, tell us anything about it. Which leads to this very metaphorical scene showing Blackbeard's dominance and ending on this funky kind of floating shot of all of the Whitebeard commanders defeated in front of him. This does unfortunately give a bit of the wrong impression though. Viewing this scene, you would be inclined to believe that Blackbeard pretty much single-handedly decimated each and every division commander, but the actual accounts of the war painted as more of a Marineford style situation. Although Marco does specifically actually mention that Blackbeard's use of the Guruguru no Mi is the reason why they were no longer able to overcome him. So that was very much the deciding factor in the fight according to that first-hand account. But however close it was, Blackbeard's forces were victorious, and this delivered a second crushing and decimating blow to what were once the Whitebeard pirates. Because after having lost their captain and now their territory, they had no choice but to splinter off and effectively disbanded the crew, thus ending the dominance of one of the most powerful organizations to have ever existed in the series, and thus birthing the dominance of another. And as I mentioned before, one of the most important takeaways in the aftermath of this was that Blackbeard became undisputedly recognized as one of the 4 emperors, which, just as a side note, I find quite interesting because it means that for a whole year there were only 3 emperors. And it makes me wonder if at any stage Marco was intentioned to become the new 4th emperor, simply due to being the de facto leader of the Whitebeard pirates and essentially having command over all of their territories. But the Payback War wasn't even the end of the grand terror for the Whitebeard pirates. Their disbandment also quite notably gave rise to the figure of Edward Weevil, who is Whitebeard's self-proclaimed son, and he and his mother, Miss Buchan, have since made it their mission to destroy what once were the Whitebeard pirates in order to claim some sort of imagined inheritance, which was quite devastating actually, and Weevil is responsible for defeating 16 of the 43 allied crews all on his own. Interestingly enough though, this legacy could also spell some pretty huge future problems for Blackbeard as well though, because Weevil himself very much swore to take revenge on the man who killed his father, so Blackbeard has ended up creating a very potentially powerful enemy there. But that is the story of the Payback War as we know it, and I honestly think it's pretty unlikely that we will ever expand on it too much in the future, because while it is a world-changing event, we do have all of the essential information, and really what this event boils down to is the truly sinister level of planning and destruction that Blackbeard is capable of. The Payback War was an event almost 3 decades in the making, and it wasn't even the final phase of whatever Blackbeard's grand plan is. To him, taking down an Emperor of the Sea and decimating his unfathomably powerful crew was just another step along the road of what will undoubtedly lead to an even greater conflict. But for now, that's everything we know about the Payback War. Luffy is the man who will become the Pirate King, but that doesn't mean that he will become the next Pirate King. Hello and welcome to the Grand Line Review, your source for everything One Piece. My name is Liam and Celsius is indeed the supreme measure of temperature, and no, you cannot convince me otherwise. But today we are here to discuss the amorphous blob of Blackbeard and his potential impending coronation as the next Pirate King. Because as Luffy always says, and we always believe, he will become the Pirate King, but that doesn't necessarily imply any sort of exclusivity to the role, and there may very well be another Pirate King before Luffy achieves his dream. Much like how Naruto wanted to become the Hokage but ended up rather patiently waiting in line for his turn. Will this series end with Luffy being the Pirate King? Absolutely. But will there be a separate Pirate King between now and then? Well, it's starting to look that way. But let's start with a bit of a misconception. I often see words which come together to form sentences, and those sentences sometimes say something along the lines of, Blackbeard has never said he wants to become the Pirate King. I see these words a lot, and it's very important for this discussion that we correct the record. Blackbeard has very bluntly made his Pirate King desires clear in chapter 440, however what remains unclear is his path to get there. Because Blackbeard also seems fairly clean on the classic world domination, much like a certain Rox Dizabek, but whether world domination is the means to become the Pirate King, or whether becoming Pirate King is the means to achieve world domination, much like Blackbeard's showering habits, is terrifyingly unknown. And initially I think that there might be some mental knee-jerk reaction to the idea of anybody becoming the Pirate King except Luffy, but we do need to ask ourselves, what even is a Pirate King? When it comes down to it, the term Pirate King is simply a title invented to describe Roger's achievement. It wasn't a crown claimed by Roger himself, it was bestowed upon him by the single most powerful force in the One Piece world, a newspaper. These things legitimately have more influence in the world than any emperor, which makes the criteria for becoming the Pirate King quite stunningly arbitrary. One thing I think most people can agree on is that the next Pirate King must have been able to reach Laugh Tale, because that would be equaling Roger's achievement and therefore I suppose making them worthy of the title. But personal definitions of what it means to be the Pirate King can differ quite radically. Sure, it could be the first pirate to set foot on Laugh Tale, but many characters also see it as gathering of unmatched wealth, fame, and power. Meanwhile, in Luffy's case, he sees the Pirate King as the person who has the most freedom on the planet. And from Blackbeard's
Blackbeard's perspective, he appears to see the title implying the exact opposite. To him, the Pirate King is the person who has the most control over the world. Which I suppose is why we need to leave things to our ink and paper overlords to choose the next Pirate King. Because there's no consensus on exactly what it is. As it stands right now, we may as well have a situation where Luffy says, the Pirate King is the person who can eat the most meat. Whereas Blackbeard says, no, the Pirate King is the person who can eat the most cherry pies. To which Luffy replies, yeah? Well, in that case, the Pirate King is the person who can stretch their arms the furthest. And Blackbeard responds, nuh-uh, the Pirate King is actually the person with the most luscious chest hair. Then Luffy snaps back, then why is your stomach so hairy? Your stomach isn't a chest, you moron. Then Blackbeard, he takes a deep breath before saying, F you, rubber boy. And then they do the fighting. I am near certain this is how One Piece is going to go down, just less comically and more philosophically, because right now Luffy and Blackbeard are running two entirely different races in search of the same prize, which is why we need some sort of referee to define the rules or at least make a decision one way or another, and at this point that referee is looking suspiciously bird-like and taking the form of Big News Morgans, a flamboyant man-bird who has already stated that a member of the worst generation will rise to become the next Pirate King. And remembering that Blackbeard is indeed a member of the worst generation gives the potential for this idea to be quite the fascinating subversion. So how does Blackbeard become the next Pirate King? Well, he actually does have quite a bit going for him. In fact, he has almost everything on his side that Luffy does, including a rather outrageous favoring by the forces of fate. Just like Luffy, Blackbeard should have died countless times by now, but the will of the whatever has kept him in contention and comfortably plonked him in prime position to become the next Pirate King. He's very much the antithesis of Luffy. In a really twisted way, they share a philosophy of pursuing dreams just via different roads. Blackbeard is like a reflection of Luffy. If Luffy was staring into a rather filthy mirror, that is. A filthy mirror with lots of grime and cracks. And also it's a funhouse mirror because it makes him rather portly as well. But if Luffy is destined to become a king, then under these circumstances, so is his reflection. It would be a contorted, toothless, dark universe style of king, but a king nonetheless. A false king, if you will, which also plays quite nicely into the Blackbeard of the real world. Because as notorious as he was, Blackbeard, or I suppose Ed would teach, was never referred to with any kind of kingly title, at least not during his lifetime. Since then, various historical records and a lot of pieces of fiction have gone on to label him as some sort of king of the pirates, which is done in a very fanciful way to make his tale sound all the more compelling, but the truth of the matter is that he was no king, which leaves him looking very much like a sort of historical pretender. Kind of like Blackbeard in One Piece, really. He masquerades around town with his mighty D, potentially promising to be that fated individual that Roger was waiting for, but as correctly identified by Whitebeard, he is not. Blackbeard is but a sinister charlatan, threatening to plunge the world into a darkness unrivaled even by the world government. And that's saying something because those guys, they're pretty effed up. But at least they'll have their teeth because dental hygiene is important. However, the more I think about it, the more I really enjoy the idea of Blackbeard becoming the next Pirate King, because it would give One Piece a true darkest before dawn kind of scenario. The idea that Luffy may have actually failed to achieve his dream and must now climb an even greater mountain to surpass Blackbeard and take that title from him. And in that way, Luffy even has to take one step beyond Roger by defeating a current Pirate King. But situations like this are also shockingly common in like almost all of media. If you look at the basic structure of almost any fantasy story, the bad guy tends to achieve exactly what they want. Take the Lion King for example. Scar's plan succeeds and he becomes the kitty-based king, meaning that Simba needs to return and take back what is rightfully his. But you can also look at just about any superhero movie. The big bad villain dude always seems to get a hold of the super powerful thing it is that they want, thus significantly raising the stakes and making it so that the hero has to defeat them at the peak of their strength, thus making the hero more hero-y. And Blackbeard becoming the next Pirate King would do exactly that for Luffy. It's the thing that he wants most in this world, and having having that be placed in the hands of our Ultimate Series antagonist is a simple and effective recipe for drama. In terms of cooking, it would be like taking 100 grams of Luffy, 2 cups of Blackbeard, 1 crown, and a generous sprinkling of lions. Put in the oven for 45 minutes and bam, you have yourself the best possible incarnation of the Lion King. I don't know why I'm so obsessed with lions today. Alternatively, there's no real reason why we need to stick to one Pirate King. I mean, Blackbeard has traditionally flaunted the one-off rules. In fact, Blackbeard could probably be best described as being in a polyamorous relationship with life, such as electing to have multiple partners. According to this image, we have 2 female Blackbeard stands and even 1 male tucked away in the corner here. Of course, Blackbeard is also known for indulging in multiple devil fruits, multiple guns, and multiple missing teeth, so why not activate multi-king mode as well? Because what happens, for example, if 2 pirate crews happen to land at Laugh Tale at the same time? And furthermore, what happens if both of those crews have massive extended forces that not even the world government is capable of keeping under control? Well, you get a situation where Blackbeard's tens of thousands of followers insist that he is the king, whilst Luffy's equal amount of followers say, no, that's wrong, Luffy is the king. You get a throne war, that's what you get. You then have 2 kings vying for supremacy, with the victor becoming known as the rightful king, whilst the loser is recorded in history as a pretender. The true king versus the false king. Kind of like the difference between Momonosuke and Orochi. One of them is the true shogun of Wano, but another got there first via sneaky underhanded tactics and needs to be unseated to make room for the ample posterior of the true shogun. We also had a false king quite literally on Alabasta, with Bon Clay impersonating Cobra in order to give Crocodile control of the country. One was the true king of the desert nation, whilst the other was just very skilled with makeup. Or like Doflamingo and King Riku, one was the true king of Dressrosa and the other was a pink homicidal bunglenut. One Piece is chock full of these false kings that are crowned in the eyes of the world that need to be brought down to make way for the rightful kings. It's a story that we have explored time and time and time again, but never on a personal level. It's always been Luffy fighting for someone else's right to do the king stuff, but the time is swiftly approaching where he will have to fight for his own desire to be a king, and having the false king of Blackbeard standing directly in his way would probably be one of the most One Piece things that has ever One Pieced. And sure, there's all sorts of logical discussions one can have about how exactly Blackbeard goes about achieving the means of reaching Laugh Tale in particular, if indeed that is the criteria we're using for pirate kingliness. There is a slight problem of needing Laugh Tale's address from the 4 road poneglyphs, many of which Blackbeard currently has no reasonable access to, but that's also a problem very easily solved by relatively simple storytelling, like say a betrayal within Luffy's alliance. Someone steals the poneglyph rubbings, delivers them to Blackbeard, and then all of a sudden, bam, he's on his way to Laugh Tale in true pirate style, which is of course by stealing things rather than earning them. But then again, even stealing does take a lot of effort, and in Blackbeard's case, a lot of his career has been about thinking smarter rather than working harder. Not that stealing is smart, don't put words in my mouth.
Stealing is smart.
And come to think of stealing, why not just go ahead and steal the Pirate King title as well? After Wano, there will be no Oni dragons or large maternal figures to stand in your way, and apart from Luffy and Shanks, there would be very little stopping the idea of just calling yourself the Pirate King out of the blue, because who exactly is going to challenge you? He could very well end up becoming a true false king by simply taking a title that he hasn't earned. Did I just say true false king? I mean, it's an oxymoron, but I kinda like it.
If this theory is correct, then Blackbeard is going to become the next Pirate King. It also explains why he doesn't sleep. And speaking of, Blackbeard has 2 major themes attached to his character that we're aware of, those being fate and sleep. So to lay the groundwork, we're going to start with fate. In chapter 222, Van Alga shoots seagulls in the distance that land on the Going Merry, stating, "Poor things, how they must have suffered. I wasn't able to kill one of them instantly, but that's fate. Such are the vagaries of life." He's the first real introduction that we have to the Blackbeard pirates, and he starts a very clear motif. In chapter 223, Luffy, Zoro, and Nami meet an old man named Doc Q, and the Straw Hats help him back onto his horse, who is also an old horseman. As thanks, Doc Q offers the crew an apple from his basket, which Luffy immediately takes and eats without a second thought, and as it turns out, the majority of these apples were explosives that kill people instantly after taking a bite. Doc Q then reassures the crew that Luffy will be okay, and that he's a lucky boy. Usually Oda is a bit more subtle with his themes, But with this group of people, he is really trying to hit you over the head with the idea of fate. Also in chapter 223, Jesus Burgess makes his presence known as a grappling champion, which immediately piques the interest of Luffy and Zoro, who both have the desire to take that title away from him, but they're thankfully stopped by Nami, because at this point in the series, neither Luffy nor Zoro stands a chance against Burgess. And as if the Straw Hats haven't had enough near misses in a single chapter, near the end of 223 is when Luffy meets Blackbeard for the first time, who is then only known as Cherry Pie Man, with the two of them almost escalating matters into a fistfight, which again would have ended in defeat and or death for Luffy. And that marks 4 times in 2 chapters that the Straw Hats have narrowly escaped from death. Van Alga had them in his sights when shooting the seagulls, Doc Q could have killed them with his apples, and if either Luffy or Zoro got into a contest with Burgess, then it would have ended very poorly for them. However, fate was kind enough to steer Luffy and his crew out of these pitfalls that would have ended their adventure, and unlike most people who encounter Luffy in One Piece, the Blackbeard pirates were well aware of exactly what was going on, which is why Blackbeard sits outside of the bar in Mocktown and waits for Luffy, because he recognizes Luffy as a kindred spirit who has been touched by fate. And that's well before Blackbeard even discovers that Luffy is a member of the D-Clan. But fate, mate, she is quite the fickle mistress. Because as much as Luffy is blessed by fate and that guides him through his journey by day, by night, fate is also secretly cheating on Luffy with Blackbeard and guiding him through all of the right steps to do all of the bad things as goodly as possible. For every outrageously convenient situation that has saved and paved the way for Luffy, Blackbeard has had something equally as convenient happen to facilitate his rise to power. He and Luffy are without question the 2 luckiest people on the planet. Although while I would use the phrase blessed by fate for Luffy, I would probably use the phrase cursed by fate for Blackbeard. Which brings us to the idea of sleep. Chapter 966 threw quite the curveball at us in regards to good old Blackbeard, because during the Odin flashback, Buggy claims that Child Teach didn't sleep the last night or the night before, and he goes on to state that they say he's never slept in his life. To which young Shanks replies, "What? Is that even possible? Lucky guy. I bet his life has been twice as fun." And I highly doubt that, because even though this was the first time that Oda had outright stated it, there had been hints about Blackbeard's sleep habits or lack thereof earlier. In fact, 8 years before this chapter was released, Oda drew a Child Teach in the SBS of volume 63, crying under a full moon, which we can now infer is because he can't get to sleep. Marshall D. Teach is a man incapable of dreaming. Quite ironic, considering that he's responsible for one of the most famous dream quotes in all of One Piece, which is obviously that people's dreams never die. But then again, the fact that Blackbeard cannot sleep means that he's that much more focused on tangible dreams in reality. So while people who satisfy their imaginations while sleeping are able to easily dismiss ideas like, oh, Sky Islands, Emerald Cities, and even the One Piece, well, wacky ideas, Blackbeard has never had that experience, and so he lives to pursue these ideas. And it probably makes him believe in these concepts that much more. Because if Blackbeard has never experienced what a dream is, then he has no idea how truly ridiculous they are. At the same time, though, he never gets to experience how wondrous they are and is cursed, which is what might be driving him to capture those dreams in reality. Now, there is another very well-known story that involves the 2 primary themes of fate and sleep, one that Oda may have taken some inspiration for with Blackbeard's character. So let me know if you've heard this plot before. A man driven and or guided by the idea of fate conducts a series of calculated murders to gain power, inevitably reaching the title of king, but setting himself on the path to his own destruction, all the while being cursed to, quote, sleep no more. So you may have heard the phrase sleep no more before. It's been floating around for a good 400 years, and it originates from this little work called Macbeth by some dude named Shakespeare. And weirdly enough, Blackbeard's journey in One Piece so far has been sinisterly similar to Macbeth's. Turns out fictional pirates and fictional Scotsmen have more in common than you may have initially thought. Every move that Blackbeard has made in One Piece has a corresponding beat in Macbeth, which gives us a terrifying potential explanation for why Blackbeard doesn't sleep, but also an even more terrifying glimpse into the future, as things are only set to get far worse for us before they get better. Let's briefly go back to the idea of fate. The inciting incident of Macbeth is when the titular character, Macbeth, stumbles upon 3 witches that give him a prophecy which states, "Hail to thee, Thane of Glamis! Hail to thee, Thane of Cawdor! All hail Macbeth! Thou shalt be king hereafter." So for the sake of ease, a Thane is a nobleman who controls assorted lands, and the witches are hailing Macbeth with his current and future titles. And the belief that these witches have foretold the future is what drives Macbeth to make a series of murdersome decisions to make his way to the position of king. And I have to say, it's quite similar to Blackbeard's journey. Hail to thee, warlord of the sea! thee. Hail to thee, Emperor of the New World. All hail Blackbeard. Thou shalt be Pirate King hereafter. Okay, so this probably sounds like a stretch at the moment, and that's because I've not given you the good stuff yet. Because words and titles are cool and all, but so are numbers. So what could 3 witches possibly have to do with Blackbeard? I mean, other than the fact that Blackbeard was originally supposed to be introduced alongside 3 witches of his own. Okay, so the word witches is definitely a stretch, but one of the most curious things about this Marshall D. Teach guy is something that never made it into the actual story, or at the very least has yet to reveal itself for as of yet unknown reasons. One of Oda's original ideas for Blackbeard was that his character was going to be accompanied by 3 women, his mother and 2 sisters. Here they are. You can see the mother looking very petite and witch-like, whereas Blackbeard's sisters are more along the lines of your standard Oda beautiful woman design, which certainly begs the question of exactly what went wrong with Blackbeard's DNA inside the dirty oven that was his mother's womb. This has always been quite a perplexing revelation for the One Piece fanbase to contend with. It just seems like it comes out of nowhere. And one common idea with Blackbeard is that he's actually 3 people, hence why he can do stuff like use 3 devil fruits and doesn't need to sleep. Maybe some of him needs to sleep, but they take turns. And perhaps Oda decided not to separate his sisters. Instead, they're present, but inside of him. Although this was supposed to be revealed after Jaya. We know that these characters were meant to appear at the end of Water 7 because, in their sketches, Oda has included Ace's reaction to them, which is even more curious. So the idea is that Ace catches up to Blackbeard on Banaro Island, sees these 3 women, and is shocked and confused. I want to emphasize that Oda actually showing us these sketches likely means that the idea has been dropped. I don't expect to ever see these characters in One Piece, but it's a fascinating window into Oda's thought process at the time. He clearly had a solid idea going with these 3 women. But at this point, I'd also like to bring up that the 3 witches in Macbeth specifically mention the ability to stop people sleeping. The famous sleep no more line is actually used by Macbeth himself. He claims to have seen a hallucination or heard a voice that informs him that, quote, Macbeth shall sleep no more. In a lot of analysis, this is taken as a manifestation of guilt, because he does say this right after, kill murdering someone. But there is another, more supernatural explanation. In Act 1, Scene 3, before Macbeth arrives, the witches are having a bit of a chit-chat about their past activities, where one of them states, I am already master of other winds, the locations from which they originate, and every direction on the compass that they can blow. I'll drain him until he's dry as hay, and won't let him sleep during night nor day. He'll live as a cursed man. Should also point out that the person this witch cursed was a ship captain, but it would imply that they have the power to take away a person's ability to sleep. And the line very much applies to Blackbeard, living as a cursed man who will not be allowed to sleep during night nor day. And the original idea behind Blackbeard happened to include these 3 mysterious women of unknown intentions, seemingly assisting Blackbeard on his fated quest to become the Pirate King. If I haven't done this enough already, it's so important to emphasize just how much Blackbeard knows and understands that he's a subject of fate, because that's something that Luffy doesn't realize about himself. But Blackbeard knows that he is destined to do something. And not only that, but Blackbeard seemingly has that path laid out for him, because even at the age of 12, when he requested to join the Whitebeard Pirates, he did this knowing that it would be the best opportunity to find the Yami Yami no Mi, the darkness fruit that was the key to his rise to power. The fruit he said he'd been searching for his whole life, and the ability that Blackbeard claims chose him. Which, firstly, that line hits a lot harder now that we know that certain devil fruits have wills of their own, the idea that this fruit chose him. But secondly, how does a 12-year-old have such an intricately crafted plan? How does a 12-year-old know this much about the world and what he needs to find? He doesn't, not naturally. Someone's plural or something, gave him the information. Just like how Macbeth was prophesied to become king by the 3 witches. If they hadn't have told him anything, then he wouldn't have done anything. And not only that, but Macbeth's efforts to become king took place at night whilst everyone else was sleeping. He acted in the shadows whilst people were at the most vulnerable, because Macbeth does not sleep. In fact, Macbeth shall sleep no more, in the same way that Blackbeard hid in the shadows and plotted by night to achieve his destiny. So there's a total of 5 steps to complete before reaching the position of maniacal kingman. Blackbeard has already completed 3 of those steps flawlessly, I might add, the first of which was gaining trust. Macbeth could never have achieved anything without the utmost trust from King Duncan, which he gained by thoroughly dispatching Duncan's enemies and consolidating his assorted Scottish powers. This is the sort of trust that takes years, even decades to build up, and Blackbeard made that investment. He was a member of the Whitebeard Pirates for 26 years before the opportunity to seize power presented itself. He was a member for so long that Teach was on the cusp of becoming one of Whitebeard's commanders. In fact, the only reason why the Division 2 commander position was vacant was because Teach declined to take it. Teach was even the one who encouraged Ace to become the commander, again choosing to hide in the shadows cast by a very bright flame. And then one day, it happened. Step 2. Betrayal. Things go a bit out of order here, but both Macbeth and Teach end up killing their close comrades because they see it as an important step in the prophecy. Macbeth kills his bestie Banquo because the witches said that Banquo's descendants would also be king, and Blackbeard kills Thatch because he found the Yami Yami Nomi, and therefore getting rid of Thatch via vicious kill murder became an integral part of Blackbeard's prophecy. We also can't undersell the degree of Blackbeard's betrayal. Macbeth and Banquo were the Scottish lord equivalent to besties, whereas Teach and Thatch were brothers. That's the format of the Whitebeard pirates family. However, step 3 was to usurp the crown, which Macbeth did in the dead of night, choosing to murder Duncan in his sleep whilst he was at his most vulnerable. And wouldn't you know it, our much hairier, much more rotund One Piece Macbeth did exactly the same. He waited until Whitebeard was in his most vulnerable state during the Paramount War, and he struck out of nowhere. And whilst it wasn't nighttime, he did cover himself in a sheet, so it was dark. But again, he hid in the shadows. And a year later, Blackbeard was officially declared an Emperor of the Sea after usurping Whitebeard's position following the Payback War. This is the point at which Macbeth became king. Duncan was dead, his sons were blamed for the murder, and everything fit into place quite nicely. However, I dare say that Blackbeard has yet to fully reach this point, because he's a man who believes that he's destined to become the Pirate King. An emperor is not good enough. And given everything we've seen from him so far, of all the puzzle pieces that have fit so perfectly in his rise to power, I don't doubt that he has the capabilities and even fated role of becoming the next Pirate King. The most curious thing though is that Macbeth knew that his reign wouldn't last, because again the witches told him who would eventually become king afterwards, Banquo's progeny, which sent him into a spiral of horror, trying to prevent the very fate that he had believed in so strongly to get himself there. Which takes us to part 4, Madness and Tragedy. To maintain his grip on power, Macbeth went on a murder spree, killing the family of Macduff, the man who would eventually put an end to his tyranny. Now this is something that you could argue that Blackbeard has already done, because he was technically responsible for the death of Ace. I mean, yeah, Sakazuki killed him, but this entire war was orchestrated by Blackbeard. So Blackbeard's actions killed the family of Luffy, our obvious Macduff. However, there is another tragedy yet to come, because it could also be argued that Luffy's family tragedy is going to be Shanks. Shanks being killed by Blackbeard is not a new thought. I've talked about it, rather appropriately, to death, so I'm not going to go too deeply into it here, but it's a very likely outcome, and one that paves the way for the final act, which is the inevitable downfall. So what happens next is, and it's rather cheeky, as part of their prophecy, the witches informed Macbeth that no man born of a woman can kill him, which Macbeth misinterprets as him being undefeatable, which is a lifestyle currently enjoyed by Blackbeard and his crew. A bunch of crazy YOLO swaggers willing to do any number of stupid things like invade Impel Down and get team wiped by Magellan's fatal poison. They're willing to do things like that because they have the utmost trust in fate. There is some greater force at play backing them, and thus allowing them to conduct what any reasonable person would consider to be suicidal tactics. And Luffy does the same, except without the knowledge of the fate that's backing him. But that's the thing. Macbeth isn't the only character in the play to be subject to the prophecy, because in a painfully semantic twist of fate, it turns out that Macduff was born from a C-section and was thus technically not born via the traditional vaginal path of a woman, which allows him to strike down Macbeth. And I think that Luffy occupies a very similar role. Blackbeard recognizes Luffy as a man touched by fate, but he does not fear Luffy, not the way he should, because whatever prophecy it is guiding Blackbeard has sneakily shrouded Luffy's role, and that's something unlikely to become apparent to Blackbeard until the final moments of the final conflict. Something I've slowly begun to realize over the years is that we've never seen Blackbeard in a state of uncertainty. No matter what situation he's in, he goes into it knowing what his dinner plans are afterwards. And that's crazy because not even Luffy is that confident. And that will be his downfall. Blackbeard will miss something and will be struck down by Luffy, who will then go on to fulfill his own fate, but we've got a lot of horror still to come before that happens. It's always darkest before dawn, and the lowest moment of all may very well be when we see Blackbeard ascend to become the Pirate King. And to be the first to know when Blackbeard becomes the thing it is I just said, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel for consistent injections of One Piece culture administered directly into your YouTube feed.
Hello and welcome to the Grand Line Review, your source for everything One Piece, and today it's time to peer into the deep darkness of a certain Marshall D. Teach, and more specifically the idea of him eventually attaining a third devil fruit, being the greedy man he is. Now this idea isn't exactly new, and it's been floating around quite prominently ever since the end of the Paramount War, when Blackbeard achieved what we all thought was impossible by acquiring a second devil fruit. And we're not so much here to talk about how or why that might be possible because it's still quite unclear, but having done the impossible once, thoughts of course immediately turn to, so what would happen if he did it again? And what's to stop him doing it again? In fact, has doing it again been foreshadowed all along by the great and powerful Oda? And the answer is a resounding, undeniable maybe. Marshall D. Teach is an aberration of One Piece because, as we know thanks to Marco, Teach is not normal. Specifically, his body is quote odd. Something that may very well have been picked up on as early as the days of the Gyrock, when Luffy and Zoro correct Nami by stating that Blackbeard isn't just one guy. Not that there's anything wrong with being just one guy, because that alone gives you the power to subscribe to the Grand Line Review, which will result in regular One Piece content being uploaded straight into your YouTube feed. So you show that Blackbeard who's boss, join the Grand Fleet, and say hi in the comments if you're a new recruit. Welcome. But back to One Piece things. These lines from Luffy and Zoro could be a simple reference to picking up on the rest of the Blackbeard pirates scattered throughout Mocktown, but it does add another of many question marks to the Blackbeard enigma. And the biggest one also comes from the Gyrock, where we are introduced to the Jolly Roger of the Blackbeard pirates. A seemingly simple and innocuous existence, very piratey, no bells and whistles. I mean, it certainly isn't, say, the Jolly Roger of the Fire Tank pirates, but then again, at least we know what that Jolly Roger is referring to. It presents Capone Gang Beige as a mafia boss and hints at his ability to become a literal castle man. Similarly, the Jolly Roger of the Straw Hat pirates is a direct reference to their captain, and you know what, even the Jolly Roger of the Tontada pirates holds deep meaning, because it's small and disappointing, a perfect representation of the Tontada tribe themselves. But what exactly does this mean? 3 bland skulls and matching crossbones. None of the skulls even have missing teeth like Teach himself, which I feel is a bit of a missed opportunity. But the greater point is that prominent pirates in One Piece do not get assigned arbitrary Jolly Rogers. It could be a really simple reference like the red hair pirate showing Shanks' scar and tendency to use swords, or even the Roger pirates where it's just putting like a double Roger moustache on a classic skull and crossbones, but there is meaning in both of those cases. Which really gives us little to no choice but to accept that this triple skull is an important reference to something. Whether that be split personalities, some sort of Siamese triplets, or even if Blackbeard turns out to be 3 smaller men in a coat. Whatever the case, there is something quite profound about the number 3 when it comes to this man. Nay, when it comes to this men. Although I suppose one of the Blackbeards could always be a woman. And you'll find many references to the number 3 with Blackbeard. Take the spread for example, one of the most iconic scenes in all of One Piece. And notice how Blackbeard is directly paralleled on the other side of the page by 3 members of the Straw Hat Pirates. Isn't it quite something that the figure of Blackbeard needs to be balanced out by 3 figures? But what's more shocking is that when we turn our attention back to Blackbeard, there are also 3 Blackbeards, which is very strange indeed. But the hidden meaning behind the Jolly Roger of the Blackbeard pirates is the primary piece of evidence that has led to the common belief that Blackbeard will acquire a third devil fruit, because the number 3 doesn't just hold great significance to him, but also the world of devil fruits, given that they are divided into 3 broad classifications. And as such, it would be almost annoyingly perfect for Blackbeard to end up with 3 devil fruit abilities by the time he does come into focus as the main antagonist of the series. In fact, in the past there was even a pretty fun idea that he was already the user of a Zoan fruit as well, because of the scar on Shanks' face, which was allegedly delivered by Mr. Blackbeard. So naturally people speculated that he was some kind of vicious Zoan user with claws like a lion or something, but this wound was more or less later confirmed to be delivered by a weapon. A weapon with 3 blades, mind you. There's that number again. But while this theory did not turn out to be the case, I still think we're on the right track thinking Zoan, because Blackbeard already holds the power of the Ami Ami no Mi, a Logia type, as well as the Gura Gura no Mi, a Paramecia type. So it's only natural to assume that a Zoan would come next, and I swear, if this whole 3 devil fruits idea does turn out to be real and the third fruit is not a Zoan, then that would probably be one of the greatest missed opportunities in all of storytelling. But with that relatively straightforward path of logics, this leads us to ponder as to what Zoan fruit Blackbeard is either actively searching for or waiting patiently to acquire. Because that's another thing that's probably hugely relevant to this discussion. The Blackbeard pirates are actively collecting devil fruits, mostly by hunting down fruit users, killing them, and using their knowledge of fruit science to capture the power assumedly within a sack of pre-prepared fruit. And while that doesn't give us many clues as to what fruit Blackbeard may be seeking himself, I do think it's important to throw that link out there, because there is no other faction in this world that is so focused on devil fruits, and even fewer factions that seem to have the sheer knowledge that Blackbeard possesses. But focusing in on the Zoan class class, it would be pretty hard to look past a Mythical Zoan, right? Because Blackbeard's 2 current fruits each possess an element of prestige, with the Guruguru no Mi being labeled as the strongest in the Paramecia class, whilst the Yami Yami no Mi is said to be the most dangerous power recorded in all of Devil Fruit history, according to the Viz manga translation anyway, which is what we go by. In any case, both of which are quite impressive, so the Zoan fruit should be something along the same lines. Like, I highly doubt that Blackbeard is just waiting for the perfect opportunity to take the Inu Inu no Mi model Dachshund, for example, but quite frankly, the Zoan class makes this a much easier discussion because there is a clear hierarchy within this classification. You have standard Zoans, then carnivorous, then ancient, and finally mythical sitting cleanly at the top, unless of course there is a level above that, which, But according to the One Piece wiki, we have roughly this many mythical Zoan users introduced to us in the series thus far, except don't count these 3 because they're not canon, and also maybe don't count Kaido for now, because in a really bizarre situation, we still don't know the name of his devil fruit, and we're all just kind of assuming that the dragon is the fruit form rather than Kaido being some sort of ogre fruit user. To be fair, it's a pretty safe assumption, which is why we're going to talk about it first. If we were to look at all of the currently known or speculated mythical devil fruits, Kaido's would be a natural choice. In dragon form, he has displayed power absolutely out of this world, and the fruit being held by a current Emperor of the Sea is a pretty good reason for Blackbeard not to have acquired it as of yet. It's a reasonable thought process, however I do find it a bit hard to get behind, mostly because I can't see us spending an entire mega arc, in fact an entire saga, featuring this dragon user as the main antagonist, just so we can spend the very next final saga of the series facing off against the exact same power just held by a different person. I mean, it's definitely possible, but aesthetically I think we're going to be a bit drained of dragon by then, although I have to admit the idea of Kaido's dragon form with Blackbeard's face, missing teeth and everything, is pretty hilarious. Let's move on though, because there are other options, one of which might be Marco's Tori Tori no Mi model Phoenix, and this is one I quite like the idea of because it provides something that Blackbeard doesn't already have, which is the general art of healing. You know, the Guruguru no Mi gives him apocalyptic levels of destruction, whilst the Yami Yami no Mi provides him with a hard nullification counter to other devil fruits, but its use does cause heavy amounts of damage. Damage that, you know, would be nice to be immediately healed by certain Phoenix powers. That feels like a nice and potentially even invincible trifecta of abilities, because right now the only opening Blackbeard has is that he is susceptible to being damaged even by lower ranked combatants. So take that vulnerability away and he may very well be able to make good on his very bold claim that he is the strongest in the world, which he said on Banara Island, and at the time it was a lie. The only problem here is, why doesn't he have this fruit already? If this was the power he was looking for, then why not acquire it during the Payback War? I mean, maybe I could accept the idea that Marco fled before Teach and the Blackbeard pirates had a chance to kill him. It's just clunky though, it's clunky all around, because Blackbeard would have had so many chances to take this fruit power, because he and Marco were also crewmates for decades, he was at the Paramount War, and so on and so forth. So as nicely as the fruit may fit, Blackbeard just doesn't seem to be too interested in it. Another one that might be interesting though would be Sengoku's Hito Hito no Mi model Daibutsu, aka Big Ol' Buddha. I'll be honest though, I mostly consider it because I think the aesthetics would make for a pretty intimidating final opponent, a giant golden Blackbeard. But then again, its shockwave ability is probably just a bit too similar to the powers of the Guruguru no Mi, making it perhaps redundant. Although I don't know, it might contrast well with the Yami Yami no Mi, pure darkness entwined with peak enlightenment. Plus, being able to take it from a former fleet admiral sounds like a bit of a rough task. Look, I don't know though, it just doesn't really seem to fit for me. And we could also look at Katarina Devon's devil fruit, which it obviously isn't, because if it was Blackbeard's target, then well, it probably wouldn't currently be being used by Devon. And guess where that leaves us? That leaves us with Orochi. That's right, he is a mythical devil fruit user, which I often actively try to forget because he is the most disappointing of the bunch, but there is something to be said about the Hebi Hebi no Mi model Yamata no Orochi, which is far too long a name, mostly because it's a mythical devil fruit that we currently have untapped potential of, so you could carry it over into a new arc with a more fearsome user, and if you wanted to be super tinfoil hat, then you could say that the 8 heads granted by this fruit add up perfectly to equal the 8 crossbones in the Blackbeard Pirates Jolly Roger. I personally am not willing to go quite that far though. I like the number 3, I like it a lot, and I know that numbers in general do have great meaning in One Piece, but that one is it's a big stretch. With that said, this might be a great way to get Blackbeard involved on Wano somehow, now holding a key interest in it, but I also can't help but be disappointed well in advance if this did turn out to be the fruit that we were looking for, which is why my personal hope is that this fruit will be one that we have not seen in action as of yet, perhaps a fruit that is unknown to the world at large, hidden or locked away somewhere on this truly massive planet. And an example of this idea would be, say, a Cerberus fruit, or Cerberus, whichever you prefer to say, both correct. I prefer Cerberus because it's just more fun to say. But yeah, just look at this thing, 3 heads and everything. everything, perfect for numbering, and I could also see Blackbeard turning into a giant pupper. There's also a nice dark link to hell involved there, further solidifying Blackbeard as something quite scary. And I should also say there's nothing to state that Blackbeard doesn't already have this fruit that we're speculating over here today. Just because the Shanks theory didn't pan out in the past doesn't mean that Blackbeard hasn't long since acquired it and is just keeping it under wraps, although I find it pretty difficult to buy that just because, you know, he's the epitome of a showboat and surely it would be common knowledge by now, but I guess the chance does exist. It's also a good idea to bear in mind that Blackbeard may not necessarily be looking for the most powerful Zoan fruit. I really think it needs to be something more suited to complement his existing abilities, which already provides him with enough power to quite literally destroy the world, so adding more power on top of that seems very redundant. And at the end of the day, I should also say there's no guarantee that he will have a third devil fruit, and perhaps we're all just reading far too much into this triple skull thing. I mean, it could have any number of other meanings that we're just not aware of yet. Like, I don't know, maybe one skull represents Blackbeard, one skull represents Zebek, and one is the grand foe of Joyboy from the Void Century. And it's all just about inherited will, like the rest of One Piece. And I literally just made that up, it's not in the script. But that's an example of just how easy it can be to derive meaning from literally anything. With that said, I still really want Blackbeard to have a third devil fruit, and I support the idea wholeheartedly. Blackbeard's ambition has finally been revealed, and it's significantly cuter and/or more disturbing than we all thought it would be. Blackbeard wanted Boa Hancock's fruit, like he really wanted it. And I have questions, but more importantly, I have answers to said questions. Because it seems about as unusual as an uneaten cherry pie in the general vicinity of Blackbeard for him to be targeting the Maramari no Mi. But there are 3 reasons why Blackbeard is so desperate to get his well-oiled sausage fingers on this rather plump and buxom fruit. Because this move isn't as arbitrary as it may seem. The Maramari no Mi might be primarily used as a gag fruit thus far, but it is so much more powerful than we give it credit for. Which is why Blackbeard immediately ceased partying with his 2 women and 1 old man in chapter 957, stating, "Pack your bags, onto the ship. If the Navy's only going to take it, I might as well claim the prize." After which point the fanbase had a wide variety of assumptions as to what this thing could be. And by wide, I mean 2. One is that Blackbeard was going to take this opportunity to snatch himself a bit of a sneaky road poneglyph, fearing that if the world government were to gain control of it, then this would make his life mildly more difficult. And option number the second was that Blackbeard had his sights set on an ancient weapon, either Pluton, Poseidon, or if you're really unlucky, Uranus. I'm quite surprised that his target was this particular devil fruit, because the question does need to be asked, why? Is he planning on consuming it himself and fulfilling his dream of becoming a kawaii anime girl?
Whatever I do, you'll forgive me, because I am beautiful. Is this really Blackbeard's endgame? The most destructive Paramecia, the most sinister Logia, and the most bizarrely appealing man boobs. I refuse to believe it, but at the same time, who else are we looking at here? His crew aren't exactly what I would describe as aesthetically appealing, and I think each and every one of them call for one of my favorite Shakespearean insults. Thine face is not worth sunburning. Oh, and fun fact, Shakespeare was actually responsible for one of the world's first recorded ya mum jokes with, "Villain, I have done thy mother." Well, to try and figure out exactly where this fruit is going to go, I put up a poll and asked all of you to vote for who is objectively the sexiest member of the Blackbeard Pirates. And in dead last place, we found Avalo Pizarro, who can best be described as horny, whilst in 10th place, we have the sickly Doc Q, and in 9th place, we found ourselves with Vasco Shot, a man spawned with the unfortunate birth defect of having his genitals on his face. And as this video goes on, we will continue to discover who the most attractive Blackbeard pirate is. But this has been a bit of a tricky topic ever since Boa Hancock was first introduced. Is the Maramari no Mi naturally overpowered as crap, or is it only overpowered as crap because it ended up in the body of a woman with assets that no amount of extra C's in the word thick could ever come close to doing justice? One thing I should point out is that the Maramari no Mi was originally intended to be a gag fruit. And not only that, but it was originally supposed to be like a lot more suggestive. Oda has stated that on no less than a very specific 13 occasions, he considered introducing a fruit known as the Ero Ero no Mi, aka the erotic fruit. And he finally succeeded in this task on the 14th occasion by toning down the concept and adding in more general emotion. Because that is going to be important when it comes to all of this Blackbeardery. Maramari is an onomatopoeia meaning to fall down drunk, essentially signifying someone ever so overcome with emotions. Which leads us nicely into option number 1. Blackbeard wants this fruit because its power is not dependent on physical attraction. The idea being that it enhances whatever emotion the user generally elicits. And
in the case of Boa Hancock, that would mostly be raging erections. But if someone else were to consume the fruit, then we could end up with a whole different variety of emotions. If Beppo were the user, then everyone would be overcome by cuteness. If Kaido was to consume the fruit, then people would be paralyzed by solid fear. And if Sanji were to dine on this fruitsome delight, then he would turn people to stone with pure cringe. I imagine it would be very similar to something like this, Frozen with the Whitebeard expression. In the case of Blackbeard or any of his crew, that could also be fear, but potentially even disgust. But if things do work that way, then it's undeniably one of the strongest fruits in the entire series. And if it doesn't, well, it's still ridiculous. Because the thing is, this fruit can take effect without any emotions in play at all. And Boa Hancock actually demonstrated this at Marineford by turning parts of the Pacifista into stone. So what happened there? Was Boa Hancock so attractive that even emotionless itty-bitty robo-peens could not resist? And in fact, did Vegapunk even give the Pacifista genitals? I, for one, would like to think that he did. But one of the more shocking aspects of the Maramari no Mi is that it is potentially one of the rare devil fruits that bypasses Haki. It can't necessarily be defended against because Haki is a direct reflection of willpower. And if you think to yourself, even for a second, that damn, she's fine, then you're gone. You end up being rock hard in all of the wrong ways. Seasoned Haki veterans are not safe, as Vice Admirals can also be casually caught up in their own thoughts, as can commander level combatants such as Katarina Devon and Vasco Shot. To be fair though, a lot of this might also be a result of Hancock's own Haki overwhelming her opponents. I think that Hancock is often underestimated when it comes to a bit of the old fight battling, but she is still a conqueror and was basically born to break people. The problem is that the rules of Haki are kind of inconsistent, and mostly exist to stop Trafalgar Law from easily becoming the most powerful character in the series. But nobody is going to stop our quest to crown the most attractive Blackbeard pirate, with Stronger clocking in 8th place, who I will remind you is a horse, and usually this is where I would judge the 5% of people who voted for him. But on this rare occasion, our options are, well, they're pretty bleak. Narrowly defeating a literal horse in a beauty contest is San Juan Wolf, who despite his wolf's name, I think pretty firmly covers those in search of a big old bear. And in 6th place, we have Van Alga, the first normal, or I probably shouldn't say normal, but the first semi-normal looking person. To be fair, he is a sharpshooter, so if anyone is going to find that G-spot, it is him. The second reason why Blackbeard may be after Boa Hancock's fruit is because it may yet hold secrets that we are not yet aware of, such as the potential of it being a mythical Zoan cleverly disguised as a Paramecia, such as being the Hito Hito no Mi model Medusa, which is the general inspiration for Hancock and her powers to begin with. This option, strangely enough, does fit Blackbeard's ambitions a bit better, because after attaining a Logia and a Paramecia, I think what we're all expecting is a Zoan to complete the world's most disappointing fruit salad. It would make Blackbeard quite unstoppable, actually. Not only does it negate your fruit powers, not only does it negate the very ground you stand on, but he also uses your own mind feelings against you. Personally, I'm not the biggest fan of this idea, and the only reason why we're even discussing it is because of what happened with Luffy. The truth behind his devil fruit has opened up a whole new wheel of cheese, where we must now suspect everyone and everything. Just on that, this does make me look back on Dressrosa very differently. When Burgess decided to steal Luffy's devil fruit, I thought of that as a, yeah, why not kind of maneuver. That kid over there has fruit. I, Jesus Burgess, am a fruit collector, so I'ma put that kid's fruit in my Jesus Burgess fruit collection. But I'm starting to wonder if Blackbeard knew all along, and Burgess specifically targeted Luffy knowing that he was a mythical Zoan. If anything, perhaps Luffy's mythical Zoan is the one Blackbeard wanted to complete his master plan. Although the thing with that is that Luffy was there, Burgess was there, and it was more of a fated opportunity. Whereas Blackbeard went out of his way just to hunt down specifically Hancock's power, prepared to fight against both the Marines and the Kuja pirates at once. So there is one more big reason why Blackbeard needs this fruit. But first, let's parade the 5th sexiest Blackbeard pirate according to your votes, and that is Jesus Burgess. And it honestly makes me wonder, would he have gotten more or less votes if he'd kept that paper bag over his head? Meanwhile, in 4th place is our swordsman Shiryu, really rocking that completely transparent bod. And our bronze medalist is Demon Sheriff Lafitte, for the people who are really into that sort of Clockwork Orange vibe. But who will be crowned the ultimate Blackbeard pirate sex symbol, Marshall D. Teach or Katarina Devon? We are going to find out after talking about something that's actually relevant, because the third reason why Blackbeard needs Hancock's fruit is not so much to wield its power as it is to use as a key, which all has to do with the petrification ability. 1059 had Boa Hancock specifically state that those who have turned to stone will remain stoned even if the user of the Maramari no Mi dies, which is both terrifying and exciting, because it brings up the potential of discovering past figures who have been petrified. Like for example, thanks to Toki, we know that devil
powerful fruits have existed since, at the very least, the Void Century. So imagine if there was a character who was petrified and remains in stone to this very day, having undergone their own roundabout version of time travel. But there's also someone even more obvious, and it's practically a synonym of stone, being rocks. We know so little about what happened to this man, but if he was petrified, then Blackbeard could absolutely be on a mission to, what would the word be? De-stonify him. And thematically, just like how Odin wouldn't be Odin if it wasn't boiled, rocks would not be rocks if he weren't, literal rocks. The scenario would go something like the user of the fruit was on God Valley, they sealed the deal with rocks and either died heroically, gruesomely, or both, and the fruit ended up in the rather chonksome hands of the world nobles, who would later force feed it to Boa Hancock. And Blackbeard found this statue because get this, he really likes archaeology. In the SBS of Volume 88, Oda gave the real-world nationalities and professions of each worst generation member, such as Mad Monk Rouge from India, who would manage a cabaret club. Then there's also Basil Hawkins from Egypt, who would have spent his life as a very fancy interior designer. But most importantly, we have Blackbeard from Somalia, who would have become an archaeologist. In a very fitting set of circumstances, Teach likes to learn. He shares a shocking amount of commonality with Nico Robin, and Blackbeard himself may be researching the hidden history of the world as we speak, discovering all sorts of funky clues that the Straw Hats have yet to stumble upon, such as a rock named Rocks. There are a couple of problems with this though. One being that Hancock quite specifically states that the new user of the Maramari no Mi won't be able to undo the work of the previous user, which makes me wonder if she's actually tried to do something like that in the past. And the second is that according to the trustworthy words of a man in blue shorts, Rocks is allegedly dead. But then again, if Sengoku believes that the petrification is irreversible, then that would be as good as dead. To him, that is. Although to be safe, if this is the case, then I think they should really smash that fancy rock statue. And option number 4 is that Blackbeard wants the fruit just because. Not everything needs to be part of some sort of grand endgame plan, and Blackbeard has shown constantly that he is a master of improvisation. He sees an opportunity and he takes it. And in this case, that opportunity is a pretty damn powerful fruit, which Teach wants to take and then, feed it to Stronger so that he can out some people with some very awkward kinks. Sometimes you just don't need a greater reason to do something than that. But I would like to believe that Blackbeard didn't just assemble the Avengers we have at home to perform a whimsical fruit extraction. And it does make me feel that Boa Hancock's powers are going to be integral going forward. If not to Blackbeard, then to Luffy. But let's get down to it. This is what we're all here for, because it is time to decide who is objectively the sexiest Blackbeard pirate. And we are down to 2, Marshall D. Teach and Katarina Devon. Both highly questionable aesthetic existences in their own right, with nothing in common except for their surprisingly similar bust size. And our winner is the captain, Marshall D. Teach, with a very comfortable 20% of all votes. So I guess the moral of the story is, if you're feeling a little less than confident about your appearance, maybe like your nose is a bit off, or you're a bit weightier than average, Blackbeard just completely annihilated the closest the Grand Line Review will ever get to a wet t-shirt contest. And if he can do that, then you, Mythical Zoan. That's what you are. Yes, you. The bearded hippo, I see you. And not just any Mythical Zoan either. No foxes, no burbs, and certainly no meticulously well-polished golden men. No, this Mythical Zoan is the exact counter to Luffy. And it's going to trigger the ultimate fight battle of light versus darkness. Hello and welcome to the Grand Line Review, your source for everything One Piece. My name is Liam and I have a bit of a strange relationship with light, because I really like being in darkness, but only when there's light. Which I guess is how this room has ended up the way it is. And my inner conflict is set to play out in One Piece, with Light Lord Luffy about to tackle the Daimyo of Darkness Blackbeard, whose aim is going to be to turn our burning sun god into little more than a mere tinder god. This portly gent has occupied a rather disproportionate amount of surface area in Eiichiro Oda's mind brain since almost the very inception of One Piece. In fact, in Databook Green's Secret Pieces, we are honored and/or cursed with some of Blackbeard's original designs. The first is this rather grizzled hunchback fellow, a very classic pirate aesthetic, complete with stick in mouth for some reason. That, or it's like a really long tooth. But the next design Oda gave a bit of a test drive was to remove that grizzled beard and replace it with a pair of testicles. Needless to say, which is, in and of itself, needless to say, but this didn't quite work out. Which brings us to, by far, the most fascinating early Blackbeard concept, featuring something much closer to what we eventually settled on, but with the very notable addition of an eye patch. Now, if you've never heard this before, then I am about
about to blow your mind. And if you have heard it before, then, well, I apologize, but it is very necessary. In 25 years of One Piece, in a world with well over 1,000 characters, most of them being pirates, not a single one of them has featured an eye patch. And this is very purposeful because Oda did reveal that he is saving the eye patch for a, quote, certain pirate. And the two frontrunners for that discussion would be Luffy and Blackbeard because they are the only two, to the best of my knowledge, that have ever been drawn with an eye patch historically. I mean, there's also that post-time skip Zoro design concept, but it's not the classic pirate sort of me eye patch, that thing, Whatever happened with that, Oda eventually passed on the patch and settled on the now classic scallywag design that we all know and, well, I feel like love is a very strong word. So I'm just going to go with the design that we all know and are familiar with. Oh, and also his original name was Everything D-Teach, which is, well, it's a choice. But do you know that one of those things isn't like the other song? Well, in this case, that things is Blackbeard. He's always been a bit of an aberration in this world. His Logia devil fruit isn't like other Logias, his body isn't like other bodies, and his shower regime is certainly unlike everyone else's due to the fact that he simply does not do it. He's not the only one though, because to bring our Luffy guy back in here, he's also one of those things that is not like the others. Which has only become more apparent recently as his Paramecia fruit has become very un-Paramecia-like and turned into a fully fledged Mythical Zoan. But with still kind of mostly Paramecia powers. I mean, it does break the system in the way the Mythical Zoans often do. But this here development has sparked many a mind thought, because Blackbeard is more or less the anti-Luffy in this series, the Dark Mirror Luffy. Less concerned with frivolities like friends and eating, and more concerned with world domination, but still also eating. And that idea is going to become a lot clearer as we go on. But the primary concern now is that if Luffy has a mythical god fruit, then what about anti-Luffy? The history of Blackbeard devil fruit theories is fraught with wild ideas that are simultaneously outrageous, hilarious, but also kind of possible. At varying stages of fanbase obsession, he has been a three-headed dog, a three-hearted octopus, and up until now the leading theory was even that he was three small men in a trench coat. By which I mean three men sharing the same body, either mentally or through some sort of physical fruit-based shenaniganry. But ever since we first discovered Mythical Zoans way back when Marco first became a big blue fire birdie, theories have existed assigning everyone and everything with a potential Mythical Zoan power. And unlike the concept of personal hygiene, Blackbeard was not immune from this. In fact, there's even quite a history designating him specifically with a mythical human fruit. And one historical artifact does come from around 4 years ago, contained within one of the most amazing Reddit thread titles I've ever seen, which is On Regard of Blackbeard's Devil no Me theory, a hype appointment, which I love because I want to start using hype appointment in my daily vernacular. Just like how you have a hype appointment 3 to 4 times a week for every Grand Line review video that comes out. In any case, this thread compiles some of what I'm generously going to refer to as evidence, but evidence that Blackbeard has a literal devil fruit. As in, he's a Hito no Mi model Satan or something along those lines. And I want to stress that most of the evidence used to back up this idea is that Blackbeard is a very, very bad man who has done some very, very bad things. Much like the devil, who I am informed also does bad things. Now with that said, within this here family bucket of deep fried theory wings, there are a couple of nuggets of intrigue. One of which is the flag of the Rocks Pirates, which quite stylistically replaces the letter O with a skull. And not just any skull, but a very horny skull. The horn shape of which is traditionally associated with either devils or goats, the latter of which doesn't really help because goats have also been historically associated with devils. Still, it's a fairly tangible cue of general evilness, which does actually make sense when we examine the real Blackbeard, Edward Teach, a man who was allegedly described as the devil reincarnated, and even has this Jolly Roger attributed to him, which depicts Teach as a horn-cladded, spear-wielding, and most importantly, fully nude devil man. Although just as a bit of a historical fact check, Blackbeard never actually used that flag, and in fact it was drawn literally centuries after his death. It's more like an artistic rendering taking large degrees of creative license, like how Oda does when he depicts how the ancient dinosaurs hunted. But real-life facts certainly would not stop Oda taking inspiration from this Blackbeard legacy. In fact, both Luffy and Teach have followed in the rather drunken footsteps of the most famous pirate to have ever existed in real life. For example, fans on the internet often proclaim that it's rather unrealistic that Luffy has achieved so much in just 2 years of being a pirate. But the real-life Blackbeard's career only lasted 2 years, beginning in 1716 and coming to an abrupt end in 1718 due to a sudden case of death via murder. And it's the same for fictional Blackbeard as well. After betraying his father for a fancy fruit, it took Blackbeard almost exactly 2 years to go from a bounty of 0 berries to well over 2 billion berries. Piece. So both Luffy and Blackbeard have had a bit of a fast track, and dare I say that by the conclusion of One Piece, one of them, at least one of them, is probably going to end up dead. But having a devil fruit is far from the only Hito potential, and there was even a video from octopus enthusiast Weevil who posited that Blackbeard may embody something closer to a moon or even darkness god. And a lot of this, as per usual, comes directly from juxtaposing Luffy and Blackbeard. Luffy has the Hito no Mi model Nika, with the figure of Nika almost certainly taking their name from the Greek goddess of victory Nike, which yes is also where famed foot covering Nike took their brand name, just deciding for reasons to pronounce it very differently. Although that certainly does clear things up here, because with that in mind, we can assume that Blackbeard has the Hito no Mi model Adidas. And just before all of the Americans lol and comment about how I just said that word, I'm going to refer you to this article entitled "Americans Need to Stop Mispronouncing Adidas." But shoes aside, if Luffy's fruit has a basis in Greek mythology, then well, why not anti-Luffy's? To that point, one of the candidates Weevil proposes is Erebus, a primordial personification of darkness. Because in the end, and I suppose in a very stereotypical manner, that is what One Piece is going to come down to, light versus dark, which is a dynamic that we already have in play. Luffy carrying the fruit of an alleged sun god, whilst Blackbeard ate a funky food that allows him to become literal darkness. And in retrospect, there were some fascinating hints all the way back in Water 7 when Ace fought against Blackbeard on Banaro Island. Ace's final attack in this conflict was more or less to create a miniature sun, and in response to this, Blackbeard said, "ZEHAHAHAHA, the sun or darkness, only one of us will win." I'm not very good at impersonating Blackbeard. In any case, Ace calls this attack the Dai Enkai Ente, but I call it losing to Blackbeard because, well, that's what it did. But it gave us a taste of good versus evil, light versus dark, and sun versus not sun. In this case, darkness triumphed, and not only did Ace's sun fail, but by association, Whitebeard's sun also failed because that's how puns in the English language work. How interesting is that though? Blackbeard is such an enemy of the sun that he even goes after homophones, having killed Sun Thatch and directly triggering the series of events leading to the death of Sun Ace. But looking back on it, Ace was a bit of a practice Luffy. He went out to sea earlier, did a trial run, failed to stop the darkness, and now Luffy has inherited that light. But something quite wild is that the future conflict between Luffy and Blackbeard was foreshadowed by, of all things, Ace's hat, which includes these two comedy and tragedy smiley faces, ones that happen to directly mimic Luffy's initial meeting with Blackbeard in an event that would become known as the Cherry Pie Incident. At every stage of this encounter, Luffy and Blackbeard had the exact inverse expressions reacting to the cherry pie and the drink and the just general everything. So the final shot of Banaro Island is quite representative of Ace being caught up in this fated conflict between the happy-go-lucky monkey and the sad-go-not-lucky hippo. And if you wanted to get really wanky, and look, I know you do, you can even look into the symbology of the hat being upside down. The sad face now making a happy smile, and the usually happy face doing a not-so-happy, which makes more sense than interest rates on a loan from Nami, because sad Blackbeard was getting what he wanted, and happy Luffy was about to lose a brother. Furthermore, there's also something deeply intriguing whenever we think about the inherited will of these two figures. Luffy carrying on the will of Roger, and Blackbeard carrying out the madness of Rocksteady Zebek, two powerful figures who once engaged in punch fighting on God Valley. Two men fighting in the land of the gods, whereas now their will has been inherited by potentially two gods fighting in the land of men. Which does sound good and stuff, but as always, we should look at other alternatives. Immediately equating Blackbeard to a mythical Zoan simply because Luffy is maybe blowing our theory loads a bit prematurely. Because there's also something quite nice about the idea of Blackbeard not being that thing that I've been talking about. Like, let's say that Luffy has a devil fruit that grants him the properties of all three classes. And then on the other, more dirty and certainly less cared for side of that coin, we have Blackbeard with three separate fruits, each granting him the properties of one. And at the moment, I know Luffy only has Paramecia and Zoan capabilities, but by the same token right now, Blackbeard only has confirmed Paramecia and Logia powers. So it would be a pretty cool culmination for both of them to be accessing all of the three, which together makes 6, but divided by 2 makes 3 again. A proper climactic finish to the series, where we use everything we've encountered in the final conflict. Devil fruits, haki, and whales. Whatever it is, you name it, we will probably be using it. Also, big related question now, why doesn't Blackbeard sleep?
When I dream at night, it's usually about fictional pirates conducting all sorts of wacky adventures. When Blackbeard dreams at night, he doesn't do that because he is awake. This man has never slept in his entire life, which may sound completely impossible, but that's kind of the name of the Marshall D game, because never sleeping is only one of 3 impossible abilities possessed by Blackbeard. Hello and welcome to the Grand Line Review, your source for everything One Piece. My name is Liam and I have 3 possible abilities. The first of which is standing upright, the second of which is making a very possible bolognese, and the third is informing you about fictional pirates. One of which is Blackbeard. Well, sort of. There was a Blackbeard in real life as well, and in fact that Blackbeard in question happens to be Eiichiro Oda's favorite historical pirate, which is why Blackbeard, whose real name was Edward Teach, has served as inspiration for no less than 3 One Piece characters. We obviously have Marshall D. Teach, but also Edward Newgate and even Thatch, each of whom take their names from arguably the most famous real-life pirate to have ever existed. It's also interesting that Blackbeard ended up killing 2 of his fellow namesakes and stole a devil fruit from both of them. It's almost like there's some sort of painstakingly planned connection here. 3 Blackbeards, each alike in dignity, except for this one, who is a traitorous murder hippo. But lurking underneath the dense chest hair, the thick blubber, and partially digested cherry pies, is one very sinister secret that allows Blackbeard to fool the world. But there will be no fooling. Black Crow, Super Llama, and Business Elmo, all 3 of whom have achieved enlightenment via the act of subscribing to the Grand Line Review, which will result in consistent injections of One Piece culture being administered directly into your YouTube feed. And if you'd like to be our next subscriber of the day, then hit the button and please do say hi in the comments below if you are a new member of the Grand Fleet. Welcome! Alright, so we've always known that Blackbeard was a little but when things truly got out of hand was the Odin flashback. Upon meeting Roger, the Whitebeard inspired by Blackbeard engaged in a spat of punch fighting, as did their respective crews. However, during this time, a young clownlet noticed something very suspicious about a boy on Whitebeard's crew. I heard he didn't sleep a wink during the ceasefire last night or the night before. They say he's never slept in his life. To which Red Nose's red-headed associate replied, "What? Is that even possible? Lucky guy. I bet his life has been twice as fun." And yes, we can confirm that Blackbeard's life has been chock full of fun. Due primarily to this image we have of him as a child staring up at the moon and lamenting the entire nature of his sad existence. This picture, by the way, very, very important. It's far from a random drawing and we'll get to why in a bit. But for now, there's something particularly sinister about a person who doesn't sleep. But more importantly, who told Buggy about this? All we currently have is the word they, which I imagine is referring to the Whitebeard pirates, who certainly do know a fair chunk about this fair chunk of a crewman. Information that we will unfortunately have to skip a few decades to get to, courtesy of Marco the Manbird at Marineford. That's true for normal humans, but as you know, Teach isn't normal. His body is odd. Maybe that explains it. It being the whole using multiple devil fruits thing, which is another of Blackbeard's 3 impossible powers, of which there are many potential explanations for. It could be his darkness logia cancelling out the deadly results of ingesting a devil fruit salad. It could also be a special Zoan fruit that grants him funky bodily properties, like say the 3-heart Kraken theory. Or it could be this so crazy but so good idea. But first, because Blackbeard has trouble sleeping, I asked all of the Grand Fleet members to provide him with a bedtime story to send him off into sleepy bye-bye land. And this wistful tale comes from a user by the name of, still thinking of a name, Booze, Women, Cherry Pies. Marshall D. Teach, the king of the pirates, obtained these and everything else the world had to offer. You want my treasure? Well, you can F off. The end. And I really enjoyed that story, but our restless pirate is still awake, so look, we'll try again later. The reason why he's awake, though, is very likely to do with a comparatively lesser explored idea, which I'm going to label multi-beard. The idea that there is not just one Blackbeard. There are, in fact, 3 Blackbeards, or perhaps even black bi for plural, but probably don't Google that. We'll get to how in a second, but this is a concept that has been heavily hinted and foreshadowed since the very inception of Mr. Big Beard Man. Firstly, here's Jolly Roger. I'm sure that you're all familiar with its 3-skulled nature, and Jolly Rogers in the series carry quite a bit of meaning, generally acting as a depiction of the captain. And there are only 2 Jolly Rogers in the entire series that contain more than 1 skull. The first is Blackbeard's, and the second is the Jolly Roger of the Calvin brothers, who co-captained their crew and therefore have a Jolly Roger presenting both of them as equal captain things. So if we were to follow this convention, which has been established throughout the entire series, then the Blackbeard pirates would effectively have 3 captains. I'd also like to include that Jolly Rogers are never random, and Oda generally imbues them with quite strong meaning. Another example of this is Diaz Drake's flag fiasco, which is one of the only Jolly Rogers in the series that does not contain a skull at all. And in retrospect, that makes sense because Drake, he was not a real pirate. He was just pretending. So no skull for you. Furthermore, the number 3 is quite intrinsically linked to Blackbeard in every way that Oda can seem to manage. He's usually seen sporting 3 guns. Post-time skip, he has 3 beardy, sectiony things. I'm not sure what they're called. Why do I suck when it comes to hair? But he has 3 of them. And he almost always is depicted as having 3 missing teeth. And as we explored before, Blackbeard in One Piece is already an amalgamation of 3 characters. But it goes deeper than that. Because in issue 8 of One Piece magazine, a truly shocking detail was revealed, which was the concept art for Blackbeard's 2 sisters, both of whom were quite aesthetically pleasing considering the genetic pick and mix they had to work with. These sisters were meant to be introduced on Bonaro Island, and there's even a sketch of Ace reacting to them in a manner that I would describe as internally aghast. So Blackbeard was originally also one of 3 siblings, and still might be actually. But just like an unsuspecting cherry pie caught in a black hole, we can still go deeper, because the man we know as Blackbeard is actually 3 distinctly different people. And let's see if we can send all 3 of them to sleep with our next bedtime story. Once upon a time, there was a guy named Thatch. The Yami Yami no Mi he found, oh boy, what a good catch. He tried to eat it and opened his hatch, but a beautiful guy named Teach thought this was a bad idea. So he killed this man, oh dear. He took a knife and made Thatch into Swiss cheese, so now Teach can find the One Piece, I think is how it was meant to rhyme. The end. That story came courtesy of Marx Marx? That guy. The story came from that guy. But sadly, our baby Blackbeard is still very much awake, so But surely you've noticed something a bit weird about Blackbeard's actions in One Piece. This man is a walking, talking contradiction. Simultaneously courageous yet cowardly. Powerful and fearsome, but also weak and just as ridiculous, like a clown dressed in a Kaido costume. Blackbeard also happens to be quite possibly one of the greatest strategic masterminds to have ever lived in the One Piece world thing. But then again, he's also a complete airheaded moron. He's also driven in a way that rivals Luffy, and yet he also acts like a lazy party animal driven by nothing. He doesn't make sense. No one person can have all of these things. It's too many things. So here are the 3 Blackbeards. The first one is our clueless coward. This is the more joyful, innocent unit that we first met on Jaya, the one whose life is summarized by an ongoing quest for cherry pie. This is also the incarnation of Blackbeard that managed to fool the Whitebeard pirates because, and get this, he wasn't acting. This Blackbeard legitimately believed himself to be one of their brothers, and in Whitebeard's final moments during Marineford, just as the old crescent moustache was about to kill him, this is the Blackbeard that claimed to be his son. This Blackbeard feels a lot more like an innocent bystander caught up in something that he can't control. And part of that something is our second Blackbeard, the evil, malevolent one. This is the Blackbeard who takes the utmost pleasure in unsavory activities, such as kill murder. This is the one responsible for ending Thatcher's life, as well as the one who gave this disturbingly evil look when killing Whitebeard at Marineford. Pure evil, entirely unsalvageable. However willing as he is, even this Blackbeard is lost without our third aspect, which, to put it in very basic terms, is the smart one. This is the Blackbeard responsible for orchestrating almost every major event in the first half of One Piece, as well as the one capable of implementing the strengths of the other 2 for said plans, which you can see quite clearly because the clueless coward is incapable of thinking too far ahead. He has a cherry pie for a brain, whilst the malevolent evil is overly ambitious, almost animalistic, and often leaps into situations that, were it not for a hint of fate, would very much result in his death. This is how Blackbeard can be so smart yet so dumb, so terrifyingly powerful but sometimes oddly weak and inexperienced. And now, here's how that is physically possible. After another bedtime story, that is. There once was a man named Firefist Ace who chased you across the sea. You killed him and his father and started a war with his brother, the pirate Luffy. He toppled Yonko and split the sky. His conqueror's haki will make you cry. So sleep till he finds you, for only in your dreams could you be the chosen D. That story came from Jew, and it's actually a bit of a scary story if you're Blackbeard, so I don't think that helped. But how can Blackbeard be 3 people? Well, there's a semi-popular idea that he is physically 3 different people, as in identical triplets. You know, like a prestige style scenario, and that two of them hide within the body of the one who uses the Ami Ami no Mi, implying that an entirely different person ate the Guru Guru no Mi. However, I'm not a fan of this idea because it doesn't necessarily explain our key question, which is why Blackbeard never sleeps. And there's also a thought out there that you can track Blackbeard's different physical incarnations depending on his teeth. Blackbeard's ever-changing teeth being his third impossible power. And if you think I'm joking, well, you're only half right. There are three broad types of Blackbeard dentistry on display in the series. His most common are the two missing teeth up top and one missing tooth down the bottom. The second most common is two up top and then also two down the bottom. And on very, very rare occasions, Blackbeard is drawn rather mysteriously with a full set of teeth. Which sounds good in theory, like a series of meticulously planned hints disguised as artistic inconsistency, but it's more than likely just inconsistency. For this video, I went through every panel of Blackbeard in the series, and there is no discernible connection to be made. And what makes this problem harder is that there aren't just three types of teeth. The workings of the Blackbeard mouth hole are ever-changing, and there are actually at least 9 or 10 different dental structures. Probably more, because to be honest, that's just where I stopped bothering to count. However, with that said, this shouldn't be discounted entirely. Just because I couldn't pick up on a pattern doesn't mean that Oda isn't seeding something here. Probably the biggest thing that raises doubt in my mind brain are the rare panels of the full sets of teeth, because that is a clear inconsistency. And stuff like this happens all the time, things like Zoro's scar being on the wrong eye. And there was even a time when, weirdly enough, Zoro was drawn with Luffy's chest scar. Very, very minor continuity errors basically, but the thing is, all of these errors get redrawn and fixed for the volume releases. Because One Piece, for a goofy pirate manga, does take continuity as seriously as it can. And yet, Oda has never fixed one of these Blackbeard panels despite the fact that it is obviously an error. Which makes me think, well, what if it isn't an error? What if all of this teeth business is indeed on purpose? But it's so tinfoil hat that I can't quite bring myself to get there. My personal explanation is that Blackbeard has a very purposeful design trait established by Oda, which is that his teeth are purposely randomized so as to always make him look as weird and as eye-catching as possible. Purely through the theory that it's not a design you ever have the chance to get used to because it keeps morphing into these sort of different kinds of weird toothy ugliness. But admittedly, yeah, it could be something deeper. And in regards to depth, my personal favorite thought is that Blackbeard is 3 people, but all of whom inhabit the one body. Something that we have established in One Piece with the whole Cavendish Hakuba situation, because it explains why Blackbeard never sleeps. His personalities take over the body in shifts, meaning that there is one very unlucky boy who is cursed with staying awake all night and never being able to play during the day, just as portrayed in the image of Blackbeard as a child, tortured by his fate of being forever lonely under the night sky, but also personalities that can be substituted in and out potentially at will. For example, when he was about to be killed by Whitebeard, the intelligent Blackbeard brought out the clueless coward who was genuine enough to tug at Whitebeard's heart and prevent the whole death thing from occurring, because that Blackbeard was being genuine. And also, I found this funny, but I always compare Blackbeard to a hippo, and as it turns out, hippos sleep for about 16 hours a day, which is precisely the perfect amount for a 24-hour rotation between 3 hippos taking 8-hour shifts each. But now, thanks to Hat Art Shop, we have the perfect bedtime story to finally put Blackbeard to sleep. Once upon a time, there was a pirate king. His name was not you. Get effed. The end. Blackbeard has 3 balls. What? Hello and welcome to the Grand Line Review, your source for everything One Piece, and today we are back on our ever-consistent hunt to find the wackiest, weirdest fan theories on this thing that we call the internet. And right off the bat, I want to emphasize that I am not interested in theories that sound in any way reasonable. Every other One Piece content creator can cover all of that kind of stuff, but what I want are the strangest left field ideas imaginable, while still maintaining a potential thread of possibility. For example, Zoro didn't actually lose his eye, he just keeps it closed to look cooler, which is utter madness, but at the same time, utter logic, because we know that Zoro is a surprisingly superficial being, such as when he made sure to strike a pose during Little Garden to protect his wax statue legacy. So would Zoro keep his eyes closed for purely aesthetic reasons? Yes, he would.
Now, as is the thing that we do, all of these crazy theories today are going to come straight from members of the Grand Fleet, and if you'd like to know how your comment can be shown in one of these videos, then the first step is hitting that juicy, plump subscribe button for the Grand Line Review, which will result in regular injections of One Piece culture administered straight into your YouTube feed, as well as keep you up to date with all of our community posts that you can comment on, like this one. Also, YouTube does tell me which users have subscribed, so I'm not saying that I give preferential treatment to Grand Fleet members, but I do give preferential treatment to Grand Fleet members. So please do say hi down in the comments below if you are a new member. Welcome. Also, very excitingly, at some stage during this video, I am going to tell you how you can win this limited edition Nami figure, where she just so happens to be cosplaying as Luffy. Another exciting Grand Line giveaway to come. But right now, I want to hear some of your crazy theories, and we are going to start with Vegapunk knows too much about devil fruits because he is a fruit. He's a fruit in a suit. And I'm not going to lie, that little rhyme is pretty much the only reason why I decided to include this quote-unquote theory. The whole Vegapunk devil fruit thing has always been quite a nice source of intrigue though. I mean, granted, I've never seen this incarnation of it, but it's been proposed throughout the ages that he's consumed some sort of devil fruit that increased his intelligence by an order of magnitude. Sort of like the intelligence boost that Chopper received upon consuming the Hito Hito no Mi, except I suppose something a bit more beyond human, like Sengoku's devil fruit, which transforms him into a giant Buddha. But in this case, this is pretty much exactly what I asked for, and also this has an added element of crazy, because if Vegapunk was in fact a quite literal fruit, then it would go a long way towards explaining this insane silhouette, which I've always referred to as something of an aubergine head. Also, fun fact, eggplants, fruit, not vegetable, which completely blew my mind about 15 minutes ago when I googled it. All D's can eat multiple devil fruits, but nobody tried, because devil fruit is actually D evil fruits, and Kozuki are secret D's. Alright, we're just gonna slap a whole new crazy theory onto the end of that already crazy theory, but let's tackle the first part first, because doing the first thing first, well, it makes sense. And I've always been interested by the thought that perhaps just everyone can eat multiple fruits, but nobody's ever tried due to some sort of urban legend. But then again, with someone like Vegapunk on the forefront of devil fruit study, you'd think that the idea may have been tested on at least one poor individual by now. But a D-specific experiment certainly may not have been conducted, as they are quite scarce in supply. Although Hey You has a different theory concerning how Blackbeard may have been able to consume multiple fruits. Blackbeard has 3 balls. What? I suppose the idea is that each testicle is capable of harnessing a single fruit power, maybe. Although even in that case, most regular human beings should still be able to have 2 fruit powers, provided they did not lose a duel in some sort of freak pirating accident. But as for a theory that's along the same sort of subject matter, when Luffy ends on the island with Boa Hancock and her sisters, I can't remember the island, the mushroom they try to pull off him but can't is actually his gum genitals. You see, this is not actually a theory. This is just a recap of the Amazon Lily arc. Let's be clear about that. Kuina's sword is a cursed blade and it killed her. Imagine the item that Zoro swore his dream on was the thing that killed his rival. Yeah, ooh, dark, man. Although pretty much every theory that revolves around Kuina travels down some very dark alleyways. This is kind of interesting though, because I still find it to be a much more satisfying explanation than, oh dear, she just fell down some stairs one day. Oh no. And also, I think it would actually be the first example of a cursed sword in the series actually doing what a cursed sword is meant to do. Because off the top of my head, I can only really think of 3. Zoro tamed the Sandai Kitetsu, which was cursed, and Luffy didn't seem to have too many issues with its brother, the Nidai Kitetsu, and Law also uses the cursed sword. So, new theory. Maybe curses don't actually exist because we've never seen one doing the thing it's actually meant to do. But our next crazy theory is going to be that you, I think, meaning me, are Sanada the perv. And okay, why would you? This requires so much context, it's not funny. But for anime watchers, and let's be real, probably most manga readers as well, what this commenter is referring to is a man by the name of Yoshikazu Sanada, who often asks Oda perverted questions in the SBS segments of volume releases, usually about characters bathing and having female characters step on him, you know, the standard stuff. In any case, one really noteworthy thing about Sanada is that he actually holds a Guinness World Record for the largest collection of One Piece memorabilia. His collection is actually 5,656 items, which is of course 5656, the trademark Gomu Gomu number. So look, after having seen this photo, yes, I wish I was Sanada, but
but sadly, I am not. But if you would like to start your own One Piece memorabilia collection, then the best place to do so would be this Grand Line giveaway, where we have one limited edition cosplaying Nami figure up for grabs. And if you'd like to acquire this glorious piece of One Piece, then all you need to do is subscribe to the Grand Line Review and leave a comment below telling me in a concise couple of sentences which One Piece character you would like to cosplay and why. Everyone who enters will be put into a draw and a winner will be announced in a future video. Exact details are listed in the description below. And yes, you do need to be subscribed to enter, because remember earlier when I told you that YouTube lets me know who's subscribed and who isn't? Yeah, that's right. But for those of you who are already Grand Fleet members, all you need to do is leave your comment and I look forward to seeing who wins this masterwork. But back to maddeningly crazy theories. Next up we have the Ring Eyes in Im, Zunesha, and Hawkeye are a sign that they have all had the Ope Ope no Mi immortality operation. Alright, this one actually is quite interesting. Bordering, not crazy, but we'll go with it. And it's mostly because I think people often forget that we've actually seen Zunesha's eyes. The general image of the elephant tends to be this like black panda-eyed existence. However, Zunesha's eyes do happen to be drawn in the exact same manner as that of Mihawk and Im. All different colors in the anime as well. Mihawk is obviously yellow, Im was red, and Zunesha was green. Or I guess a sort of turquoise if you wanted to have more of a color wank, and yes, we do. Which is fun because Zunesha is confirmed to be old AF, potentially some sort of immortal existence, but before we get a bit too invested into this idea, it's also important to note that sometimes eyes are just, eyes. Because Cavendish also has these eyes, but only in Hakuba form, so that's a potentially solid indication that this is just sort of some funky Oda style and not at all designed to be connected. Sanji isn't horny, he just seeks love after his rough childhood, expressed in his simpness. Yeah, I feel like this is one of those situations where two things can be true at the same time. I'm definitely very much on board with the whole mother complex thing. Sora really was the only positive aspect of Sanji's pre-Baratie life, and I suppose Reiju as well to a much lesser degree, but the greater point being that the only people who were even remotely kind to Sanji during his Germa days were women. So it makes sense that the only people he just downright refuses to hurt are women, although he is still an undeniably thirsty lad. Shanks is a D, honestly. I don't think it's crazy enough if Roger gave him the hat. Honestly, now that I write it out, not that crazy. Well, if it's not crazy, then I have no interest in it. Mihawk is a vampire devil fruit user. Yes, much better in terms of sheer crazy. Having said that, I'm not actually sure how to respond to this. So I did recently make a video about what if Roger was a devil fruit user, which you should definitely check out, but Mihawk inhabits a very similar area. He's the kind of character who I suspect that the general consensus is would just be cooler without a fruit power. You know, the whole idea that being a swordsman is all he has, and that's all he needs because that's all the world can handle. With that said, if Oda did decide to reveal that Mihawk was a devil fruit user, tomorrow, then I have no doubt that most of us would be on board by close of business. Oda can just make anything work, even a vampire devil fruit using Mihawk. Speaking of Oda though, Oda has actually never been sick. He just takes breaks to figure out how to continue the story. I see, so this is like a crazy theory regarding real life. Alright, well here's the fun thing, I don't necessarily disagree with the general sentiment. The cited reason for manga breaks, whether it's One Piece or any other series, is almost always author illness, which isn't surprising because it is a brutal profession, and if anything it's surprising that mangaka don't get sick or injured far more often. Still, I don't think it's out of the question for an author to just fall behind on this insane workload, maybe have a bit of a rough time submitting a manuscript with an editor and just need more time. And sickness is a very convenient excuse that everyone will buy. I just can't quite see it happening with Oda and his particular work ethic though, at least not very often. Okay, Brooke and Kuzan are somehow related by blood. So this is one I've definitely heard before, but I'm going to let Flash Smash, which is actually surprisingly hard to say, I'm going to let Flash Smash answer this one. But he doesn't have blood. Yo-ho-ho. Which honestly is the best skull joke I've ever seen in my comment section, so well done, Flash Smash. I hate your name though, I really hate saying your name. As for the idea of Brooke being related to Kuzan, the theory, I guess it kind of works. If Kuzan was a grandson or a nephew or something, because the time that Brooke spent in the Florian Triangle is quite notably longer than Kuzan has actually been alive. So Brooke would have already needed to have procreated once or have extended family who continued down the line to a future marine Marine Admiral. The 9 shadows in Toki's prophecy refer to Zoro's swords when he uses Ashura. And here we have the ultimate Zoro fanboy dream. Not content with the idea that Zoro will form one of the 9 shadows to take down Kaido. No, not enough. Zoro needs to be literally all 9 shadows. It's just blatant Church of Zoro propaganda, and I love it. Luffy will accidentally sit on the empty throne in Marijois because he is tired from walking around the large palace, and it looks like a comfy place to sit. The Gorosei then make the NL face. It's simultaneously ridiculous, yet not at all ridiculous. It's actually really good because it's so easy to see Luffy doing something like this. There is no other character in the series where I would consider this as being, a reasonable idea, but Luffy, well, he'll just do it, won't he? A man who intentionally punched a world noble would certainly accidentally sit on the symbol of world domination. With the world nobles in mind though, Fujitora is the son of a celestial dragon and blinded himself after seeing how they treated others. And I am legitimately bothered by this because the last 2 crazy theories have sounded far too reasonable. At first, anyway. I do like this idea at face value, the face being where the eyes often are. And if Fujitora was to see some, really messed up stuff, then hanging around the world nobles would certainly be the place to do so. However, I believe that Fujitora actually speaks with an accent, which would indicate a very different heritage. In the official English translation, Fujitora almost sounds like a Southern American gent, using words like ain't and fella, and I do think it's supposed to be the American localized equivalent of like a Kansai dialect or something. And not to be rude to any Southern Americans who may be listening, but it's probably designed to indicate that he's not quite of noble heritage. The manager at Team Pokemon is actually Liam from Grand Line Reviews. Crazy, I know. Yes, it is crazy. I have no idea what you might be referring to, but we should probably move on to the next theory before people start becoming suspicious. The One Piece is a beautiful mold of treble, shriveled, naked body. You know what? Forget moving on, because with that painfully detailed image in mind, we're done here. But if you'd like to see some more wild ideas, then please do go and check out the Crazy Theories playlist. Plenty of thoughts mixed with 90% madness and 10% genius. So I look forward to seeing you there.